News. 9/11 continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
Welcome back, and thank you for joining us for at least part of our commemorative broadcast today. Out of a clear blue sky, and that's what it looks like from across the Hudson River today, and of course that's what it looked like a year ago, which is why we all remembered the terror struck out of a clear blue sky. We are commemorating today. We were honoring people. We were trying to take stock of the country. What the writer Paul Auster, I heard the other day, refer to as a family tragedy. And it is in so many ways. Then, on that day, that long, long day, and again today, this feels like a family tragedy. We're going to spend a fair amount of time in this particular half hour talking about the long road back to recovery, and certainly about the economic recovery, the economic impact in various people's lives. At one point today, the New York Stock Exchange was about to open at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. It had been delayed because of the ceremony. It didn't finally open until 12 o'clock, and they opened with a moment of silence. Rudy Giuliani there on the left, the chairman of the stock exchange on the extreme left, governor of New York, Governor Pataki, and the mayor, Mike Bloomberg. All of them today. And the reason they delayed their opening until actually 12 o'clock, as it turned out, not 11 o'clock, was because they did not want to begin until all the names had been read aloud at Ground Zero, and the senior officials of the day, the governor and the mayor, were able to get from Ground Zero up to the exchange. ABC's Betsy Stark is with us today. You saying a moment ago, and I want to come back, because just on this one point, you said the NASDAQ opened early and people thought that was a bit tacky.
Yeah, the NASDAQ opened at 11 as planned, and there was some talk that maybe that was a disrespectful thing to do, but the NASDAQ is in Midtown, not near Ground Zero, and they don't always do everything in tandem.
All right, just stand by for just a second. Everybody in the country knows, I think, that the economy was already showing signs of weakness well before September 11th, and after the attacks, it only got worse, and people in any number of industries and businesses, could just see the accelerated effects of the uncertainty that was created in the country. Many businesses have still not recovered completely by any means, and the psychological impact of the attack continues to play havoc with the stock market. So we're going to ask Betsy first to bring us up to date on the economic fallout from the day in particular, and then we'll talk about the economy today.
American capitalism stood still in the days after September 11th. Businesses closed, malls were empty, planes stopped flying, stocks didn't trade. Economist Bruce Steinberg, who witnessed the attack from his office overlooking Ground Zero, says the $11 trillion U.S. economy was in shock.
Nothing in our lifetime had ever happened that came close to doing that. And most economic activity pretty much came to a halt.
For an economy already in recession, the risks of a much steeper decline were enormous, but so were the efforts to restore stability. Within hours, the Federal Reserve began flooding the banking system with cash to keep checks clearing and ATM machines flowing.
Because there would be nothing that could create greater uncertainty than to go from one ATM to another ATM to another ATM and not be able to get out a sufficient amount of currency.
Wall Street leaders and repair crews worked non-stop to restore the power and facilities needed to reopen the New York Stock Exchange.
Whenever that bell was to ring again, it was going to mark the final message to the murderers, to these terrorists, absolute cannibals, that they had lost.
To prevent widespread bankruptcies in the airline industry, the federal government approved a $15 billion bailout. And the auto industry got consumer spending.
And 0% financing makes it a good time to buy a car.
By selling patriotism and value.
It literally did keep America rolling.
Alan Greenspan was astonished by the rebound. In March, he told Congress,
even a subdued recovery would constitute a truly remarkable performance for the American economy.
While the worst was avoided, a year later the effects are still being felt, particularly in the travel and tourism industry. Theme park attendance is down 15%. The hotel business remains weak. And U.S. Airways says the attack helped push it into bankruptcy.
We took the brunt of the aftermath as far as the East Coast travel that evaporated.
Most of the airline workers who lost their jobs in the months following 9/11 are still unemployed. The impact on the broader economy is harder to see. In a year of corporate scandal, intensified fighting in the Middle East, massive stock market declines, and now a possible war with Iraq, the September attacks are one more problem for a weak economy. They have created fear of more attacks and more economic setbacks.
9/11 has contributed to a climate of caution in the business community, and that has stood in the way of economic growth because cautious executives, Peter, don't spend a lot of money and they don't rehire workers, many of whom were laid off in the aftermath of 9/11. Might have been anyway because of the recession, but that process was accelerated.
On the subject of spending, the president took some flack when he suggested that the most patriotic, that a patriotic thing people could do would be to go out and spend rather than sacrifice. But in fact, did it work?
Yeah, I mean, Americans warmed to the idea of being able to do something good for the economy while they were spending. So they were happy to take advantage, for example, of those 0% finance officers, knowing they were doing something good for themselves and something for the economy. And when I've talked to people on Wall Street, many of whom were out of their headquarters after 9/11 because they're located so close to ground zero, they felt a kind of a personal commitment to getting back to work as quickly as possible, to getting those markets operating again, as an act of defiance and an act of needing to show the world that you can't stop these markets, you can't stop this system from operating.
Many thanks. You actually lead us in the direction of our next report, because as millions of people know who've either been immigrants to the United States through New York City or who have come from immigrant families know that Lower Manhattan has always been a place of small businesses, and the destruction in that what we call Lower Manhattan dealt a very severe blow to the neighborhood and to the business community there. Many large corporations, as Betsy said, left the area after the attacks, despite some real incentives from the government for them to stay. For small businesses, which are such an integral part of the character of that part of the city, it has been particularly tough since September. There are at least 70,000 fewer jobs downtown, more than 100,000 jobs lost in New York overall. This translates into a huge drop in customers. And as many as 10,000 small businesses have been obliged to close their doors, and 9,000 others have not been able to get through this without some government aid. That's a real human story. Here's Bob James.
It's been a good story. Charlie Coletti still has the same ready smile, the same hopes for his shoe repair business, the same love of his work.
I don't know how to do anything else, to be quite honest with you. You give me a pair of shoes, I'll repair them. You give me a wall, I don't know how to do anything to it. I'm not handy.
Okay. A year ago, Charlie, who is 39, had his hands full.
The morning of September 11th, the line was outside for shines. I had 4 people here, and I had 5 people in the other store just shining shoes.
It was as black as Ace's face. Charlie was living his idea of the American dream, operating 2 shops, both less than 100 steps from the World Trade Center. It was a stretch. He had financed them with a patchwork of loans, but that day he was turning the corner.
It was great. It was great. I was counting the days that I would pay these loans off because I knew it was going to become a very nice living. I wasn't going to become a wealthy man from it, but I didn't have to worry about where I was going to get the next $100 to pay my bills. Tony's going to fix shoes soon.
Charlie's younger brother, Carmine, had joined him as partner and manager of the shop in the World Financial Center.
We're very close, me and my brother. We grew up together, played together. We had the same friends, went to school, same schools. We were only 16 months apart, so we were very close.
Don't even touch it. Don't even touch that. There's something else. Carmine and Charlie are the 3rd generation of Colettis in the shoe repair business, following their grandfather and Father Giuseppe, who moved the family from Italy to Brooklyn when the boys were children. And they built a business bigger than any previous generation of Colettis could have imagined. Then, September 11th, one shop was forced to close. The other in the damaged World Financial Center disappeared when a pedestrian bridge just above it collapsed.
When I went back in for the first time to take pictures for the insurance, there was no ceilings, there was no walls, there was nothing.
The future seemed gone. 14 employees, Charlie and Carmine, were out of work. The second store sat empty for 3 months because it was too close to ground zero.
By looking on TV and pictures in the papers and stuff like that, I never thought I'd be back here.
As the search at ground zero continued, Charlie got help from the Red Cross to pay his mortgage. Carmine went on unemployment. Though it was closed, Charlie began visiting the remaining shop for comfort.
What encouraged me was that when I used to speak to the police officers on the corner, they used to tell me, you know, I don't know what it is about your shop, but every day we get six, 7 people. When's the shoe repair open? That's what kept me going with that. I had to open this place. Armando, I'm sorry.
So one day, even though the streets were still closed, Charlie simply reopened the surviving shop. He brought back 3 of his employees. At first, business was almost non-existent. But Charlie and Carmine needed to get everything back to normal. So when they heard the World Financial Center would reopen, they made plans to rebuild their other shop. It wasn't easy.
Mayor. Thank you very much, Governor.
You turn on the television, you had the mayor, the governor, saying that we're going to help all the small business and help this and help that. It wasn't there.
What was there was a frustrating process of applying for aid. The Colettis filled out document after document, stating they were unemployed and that their tiny shop had lost 100% of its business. But the difference between what the government offered, about $4,000, and what the Colettis needed was big. There was one small immediate grant from a foundation. Finally, Charlie borrowed from his father and eventually got a loan from the Small Business Administration, but at a price.
You mortgaged your house to keep this business going?
Of course. That's how the SBA gave me a loan. They put a lien on my home. And they gave me money for this store and they gave me money for the other store. But there is a lien on my home.
Today, dozens of small businesses near the Colettis' shops remain closed. But barely 11 months after that day, the Colettis' Cobbler Express in the World Financial Center was back in business.
Do you want a leather sole or rubber?
Rubber.
Customers have started to return. The small sign announcing the reopening seemed an understatement of their long struggle to start over. But there is a reason.
Me and my brother got out of there alive. We got home, we went home to see our kids. A lot of people didn't. I feel sad about that.
The Colettis' future remains only a few paces from where the World Trade Center once stood.
Charlie, did you ever think about not reopening?
No. I always wanted to reopen. If you don't reopen and you don't come back, in a way you're defeated, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted to be down there, because if you give up, you lose. And I don't want to lose.
Now we're going to touch very gingerly the subject which is in many ways the most complicated of all in terms of human recovery, and that's the psychological impact of this tragedy. It's just simply hard to gauge. We're going to listen to a professional in a moment, and I think she will help. But this process of mourning and recovery is an extremely personal one. We've talked to hundreds of people. We've talked to firefighters and policemen. We've heard people talk on behalf of others. There are painful ways to get through this, and there are people who don't get through it. But those searing images of September the 11th are deeply implanted in them. And so we asked first Chris Cuomo to put together a report, which I suppose you could actually call the marks of mourning.
New York City firefighter Tierna Cassidy will never forget what he witnessed on September 11th, or the friends he lost. For 2 long months, he worked 24-hour shifts battling smoke and flame, dedicating himself to recovering victims, searching for lost members of his company. But for him, that just wasn't enough.
Probably nothing would ever seem like enough, you know, losing that much life in one day.
So this is how he's decided to preserve the memory of his fallen brothers and to deal with survivor's guilt and grief he can't describe.
When you can't put it into words, I put it into a tattoo.
He is dedicating his entire back to the image that haunts him. Embracing the towers or the Statue of Liberty torch, St. Florian, the patron saint of firefighters, and an angel carrying the names of the men in his company who didn't make it out.
Why not paint something on the side of your house or build a memorial garden? Why a tattoo?
For what mentally I went through that day, I needed to do more. And so there's nothing more I can do than this.
Every aspect of the tattoo has meaning for him, even the pain, which is considerable after 40 hours of applying needle to skin.
This pain is only temporary. Every time I think about, oh, that's enough, that hurts too much, or whatever, I don't. Because I know they didn't stop.
While Tierna Cassidy may have the largest memorial tattoo, he is far from the only one to go with this route of remembrance. Since September 11th, over 4,000 people have come to New York area tattoo parlors like this. But they're not looking for just decorations or beauty statements. For them, the tattoo is a permanent reminder of something much more meaningful.
They're really changing people's lives. This is not a regular tattoo that you come in and you get like a Tasmanian devil tattooed on you, or you may get a butterfly.
Since September 11th, Dozer King has had 500 people come for memorial tattoos, including 300 fire and policemen, featured here on his wall of honor. Many of them finding comfort by getting a tattoo for the first time, like police detective Thomas Kosnick, who removed bodies from the World Trade Center.
It was like that they was tattooed to my soul anyway, so I didn't see any problem with getting it on my body.
I needed something. I needed to do something for me.
For others, like George Henrique, a tattoo is a way to keep his lost loved one close.
This is the photo that I actually used, and this is what he wound up doing. There's such detail, her eyes, the coloring.
His daughter Michelle worked on the 97th floor of the South Tower. He says he never would have considered a tattoo before 9/11, but that's changed. For him, everything has changed.
I can't hold a hand, you know, I can't touch it, but I can touch this.
I think certain people would say that they are showing something on their outside that has permanently affected their inside. They can wear that memory on their body and see it, and in some ways both carry it and move beyond it at the same time.
I have a piece of my heart that's gone. It's back. To a certain degree, it's back.
Chris Cuomo, ABC News.
Yeah, there's so much debate about tattooing these days, sometimes referred to when kids get them as a lifetime reminder of a momentary whim. But here is an instance where the intention of having a tattoo is to have a lifetime reminder. We welcome back John Miller, who covers the police and the fire department for us and has for so long time. You know an awful lot of firefighters, and because we're talking about firefighters there, a lot of them do feel guilty, don't they?
They do, and I mean, you talk to regular folks and they say, boy, I was lucky, that could have been me. A lot of firefighters I spoke to had the opposite feeling. They said, you know, that should have been me instead of him, especially the ones, and this is very common in the New York City Fire Department, who had traded shifts with brother officers that day. There was a lot of that.
You may not know this, I don't, but I know that a lot of firefighters have not gone back to work for various health reasons. And I don't know the numbers in the police. I think it's more than 700 firefighters have not gone back for that reason. Do you know of a lot in either the fire department or the police department have not gone back because they are still too disturbed by the whole thing?
I know a lot who have gone back and then had to leave, saying, I thought I could do it, but I couldn't do it. I also know that from the police side, they're retiring in droves this year at a much higher rate than before.
Well, we're joined now by Dr. Joanne DeFede, who's the director of the trauma program at the Weill Cornell Medical Center here in New York, and it falls on you for us today to answer these questions about post-traumatic stress, how much there is, how much there isn't. I see in the polls sometimes that people don't feel as depressed as they used to. First of all, in this instance, what is post-traumatic stress in this instance?
Post-traumatic stress disorder is a well-defined syndrome of symptoms that can occur after one perceives that one's life is threatened. The symptoms include re-experiencing the event, having images, which can often be very, very vivid, pop into your mind. They can be visual, they can be oral. For burn patients, they can be kinesthetic. You can feel your skin burning. You can have flashbacks. in which it feels like you're reliving the experience all over again.
And you've seen all this year.
We haven't most certainly seen that.
Does anybody escape unscathed?
It's hard to answer. Previous research suggests that about a third of people who went through the Oklahoma City bombing, for example, had post-traumatic stress disorder. There are 3 good studies that have come out that suggest that a similar percent will have a post-traumatic stress disorder from the World Trade Center. But you're asking a broader question. The broader question is can a person escape without being unaffected? I don't think so. I think that if they're fortunate and they don't have a psychological condition, their life is still transformed.
Some of the people, I just alluded to it in terms of talking about some of the firefighters and the policemen, some of the police and the people who've been through this experience here in New York associated with Shankill have been totally debilitated by it and not been able to resume normal lives. Is that a larger or smaller percentage of the survivors?
Hard to say. Again, a hallmark symptom of PTSD is avoidance, avoiding anything that reminds you of the trauma. So people, for example, who can't go back to work, there's a good educated guess would be that they probably have post-traumatic stress disorder.
Somebody said to me the other day, they were trying to do an analysis of the spiritual component of this in the last year. They said that for Jews, there was so much survivor guilt about the Holocaust, that the Holocaust was such a huge dimension in Jewish life, that it was almost hard to focus on this in some respects. Do you agree with that? And could you talk to us just a bit about what we just so loosely call survivor guilt?
I haven't met anyone who survived this who doesn't have a degree of survivor's guilt, so I can't speak to that statement. It's such a broad statement. But it is a very common part of an experience such as this, where you escape, a person escapes with their life, but a colleague, a friend, a family member doesn't. And the person is left with the question, well, why me? Why did I survive? Why am I here? One usually asks oneself all sorts of existential questions. We hear commonly stories where a person was supposed to be there that day and they weren't, and someone else who was not supposed to be there was.
Do you truly believe, I realize you're a professional, this is your craft, but do you really believe that anybody who's been associated with this should seek some treatment, or at least go and consult about the possibility of treatment, even at this stage?
Well, we're at the stage now where post-traumatic stress disorder would be chronic. And so if a person's having problems, I would most certainly suggest that they at least go to talk to someone once. Look at it like going to your family doctor for a checkup. If you have a cough, then you would go to your doctor. You wouldn't try and diagnose it yourself. But I think because we all have our own theory of human behavior and what is and isn't normal or appropriate, we often don't seek help when we should. It's a debilitating condition. Affects marriage, economic performance, work performance. And so if you're in any doubt, why not just go talk to someone once?
Exactly. Thanks, Dr. DeFede.
Television commercials now, on the assumption that people are not reaching out. I think it's liberty.com or something. But the television commercials are focused on getting people to realize you need this help. It says there's nothing wrong with getting better, urging people to come forward, really, for counseling.
John Miller, Dr. DeFede, thank you very much for this contribution. I guess, as Dr. DeFede points out, in the early days after September 11th, for so many people, it was hard to believe that life would ever return to some sense of normalcy, but of course it does. And it is remarkable what can happen in a year. We've actually asked a lot of poll questions about this. Related to this particular conversation, a new ABC poll finds that only 29% of Americans say the attacks have changed how they live, and of those, 69% say the change is actually for the better. Here's ABC's Dean Reynolds.
You can see the evidence at the Sears Tower in Chicago, where the tourists are back on the observation deck of what may still be a terrorist target. And it's as clear at crowded movie theaters across the country, at the bustling casinos of Las Vegas, and on the highways packed with summer travelers. A public that was admonished repeatedly in the days after September 11th to go on about its business has essentially done just that.
You have inside the brain this little thing that remembers September 11th, remembers the vulnerability, and then this enormous orbital force of get on with your life, do the things you were doing before, enjoy yourself.
Health surveys now show virtually no elevated levels of stress in the country, indicating that the year-old tragedy has receded to the back of the national mind.
It's not part of my daily thought process anymore. It was immediately after, but not any longer. You know, life goes on.
And the notion that the attack on America changed life here forever has been roundly debunked.
Terror!
At the MGM Mirage casinos in Las Vegas, it's almost as if 911 never happened.
All things considered, our rebound has been faster and stronger than I think anyone expected it to be.
He's very cute. 6 foot tall.
At Great Expectations Dating Service, company president Mitchell Brandt says in the days after September 11th, there were serious searches for mates.
The phone was ringing off the hook. We just had an enormous number of phone calls, probably about 5 times what we normally get.
Today, that urgency is gone.
People are probably very, very close to where they were before.
Let us pray to
Places of worship experienced an upsurge of interest right after the attacks. Pastor Michael Noble of the Olivet Baptist Church in Chicago.
I think that what happened to us was probably typical of most churches in this country.
And what happened was that the upsurge dissipated after 2 months or so.
Do you feel that in some ways an opportunity was missed?
Yes, I do. The profound impact that September 11th could have had is actually to awaken the conscience of America, to really have us do this more difficult job of reflecting upon what's really important to us.
Really, there's been virtually no lasting change in terms of people's religious behavior or beliefs.
George Barna studies religious trends.
We thought, well, this will probably be the thing that triggers some kind of ongoing religious change. So we were very surprised when we saw how quickly things reverted back to normal seasonal levels.
Keep America rolling.
How to handle the tragedy was a particular challenge to advertisers who immediately sensed that weaving patriotism into their pitches was the way to go.
With the Ford Drives America program.
But now, a year along, focus groups are signaling for something else.
Enough with the patriotism. While it was nice initially and it was a way to rally around the flag, we're also hearing enough already, let's move on, it's time to move beyond that.
Customer surveys suggest there's been a return of cynicism bred in part by a war on terror with no end in sight.
This is a kind of invisible war against a seemingly invisible enemy fought by a handful of elite troops in a very distant place.
And as the months have passed, many of the heightened security measures introduced last September have been scaled back. National Guardsmen are gone from the airports. Patrols at major bridges and vital utility plants are seldom round the clock.
I would have to say that, the priority seems to be lessened over a period of time.
That side's secure.
A year ago, Anderson, Indiana took a number of new steps to protect its 60,000 residents from terrorists. Today, the city is still watchful, but hardly on edge.
Actually, our police departments are just maintaining their normal routine patrols at this point.
Polls show there have been some lasting changes spurred by September 11th, a desire for closer family relationships, more pride in the country, and heightened concern that terrorism will return.
But exactly where it's altered the country forever will be hard to pinpoint, perhaps because of the resilient nature of America and Americans.
You have to live lives. Otherwise, it's trite, and people have said it since September 11th, they win. They've stopped our world, and you can't let that happen.
Indeed, the biggest difference between then and now may be a greater resolve to show the country's adversaries that nothing they do can change it. Dean Reynolds, ABC News, Chicago.
In this long debate this year about whether the country has changed or how has it changed, and the people on both sides, of course, one of the most consistent arguments is about this question of civil liberties. If you ask people in most polls in the country, most people appear so far to be prepared to sacrifice some of their civil liberties in the name of security. But there is quite an intense debate beginning, or the debate is become more intense with the courts becoming involved and with the Congress becoming somewhat more involved in 2 major American newspapers today, in the New York Times in New York City and in the Los Angeles Times on the West Coast. Their lead editorials deal with civil liberties. The New York Times says, among other things, to curtail individual rights, as the Bush administration has done, is to draw exactly the wrong lessons from history. And the Los Angeles Times, which has a big editorial called Self-Inflicted Wounds about rights and the new reality, it says, even in wartime, America is not a dictatorship. They're much more in-depth than that. But it certainly is a reminder that this debate is going on in the country with increasing intensity. With a report on that, here's ABC's Jackie Judd.
Attorney General Ashcroft moved aggressively after the attacks, expanding the executive branch's legal authority to root out terror suspects. He ordered the roundup of about 1,200 mostly Middle Eastern men, many whose identities and deportation hearings were kept secret. The creation of military tribunals with broad authority to impose the death penalty. The indefinite detention of American citizens as enemy combatants. Today, Ashcroft is certain he has taken the right course.
This isn't a competition between freedom and security. The security, its purpose is to secure freedom.
Critics say it is a competition, and the very freedom and civil liberties Ashcroft is trying to protect are in jeopardy.
The government has run roughshod over, virtually every right in the Constitution other than the right to bear arms has been infringed in the name of this war on terrorism.
Some courts are now reeling in the Justice Department. For example, a federal appeals court ruled against the secret deportation hearings, warning that democracy dies behind closed doors. The Justice Department may appeal. And the administration is arguing before another skeptical judge that it has an absolute right to label suspects as enemy combatants. That label means Jose Padilla and Yasser Hamdi, both U.S. citizens and both suspected of aiding the enemy, are being held in virtual isolation in military prisons with none of the rights they would have in civilian courts. Frank Dunham is trying to represent Hamdi.
You just sit there in your little jail cell with no family, no friends, no lawyer, no nothing till this is over because we deemed to put that label on you. That's a pretty scary proposition.
The administration has backpedaled on some initiatives, including a proposed domestic surveillance program called TIPS and a military tribunal's power to hand out the death sentence. But a conservative ally says no one should believe the Justice Department is rethinking how it fights the enemy.
The administration has chosen its side of the legal track, and it is staying there because its conception of where they are is this is a war, we need to prevent the next attack, and to some degree to worry about whether or not we've gotten the law right a bit later.
Getting the law right now or later, a debate that is a legacy of September 11th. Jackie Judd, ABC News, Washington.
In this nation of laws, it is hard to tell where this argument is going to take us in the months ahead, but it is certainly very American to have it. And I don't want to embroil our commentator, George Stephanopoulos, to any greater degree than is fair to anybody, but just tell me this, George, at this point. Where do you think this argument will take us?
I think what's going to happen is you're going to see some more scaling back, some more reining in of the powers that the administration and the executive branch took in the early days after September 11th, and which, frankly, Congress granted them. In the immediate days after September 11th, Congress pretty much codified a lot of the actions that the administration took on their own. Now you're starting to see questions from Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, and as Jackie Judd pointed out in her piece, the courts are starting to scale back, and it may even get to the Supreme Court.
There is some embarrassment at Congress that they gave the administration quite as blank a check as they did, and do you really believe that this will, A, get to the Supreme Court? I think most people do, and do you think quickly?
I think there is one question that should get to the Supreme Court. I'm not sure about the timetable, and that's the question of whether or not these American citizens like Yasser Hamdi and Jose Padilla can be held indefinitely without even the chance to make their case. A lot of legal commentators, most prominently Stuart Taylor in the National Journal, have pointed out that at a bare minimum, they should at least be able to present their case and answer the charge of whether or not they're an enemy combatant. The lower courts seem to indicate that they thought the administration had gone too far, and that should get to the Supreme Court.
Thank you, George. George Stephanopoulos in Washington, joining us periodically in the course of this day and in this evening. We will be back in a moment to continue our coverage, but here is another September 11th postscript. This is about a man named John Labriola. He was a Port Authority worker who was having a meeting on the 71st floor of the North Tower when the first plane hit. He's an amateur photographer, and he had his camera with him.
We didn't hear it as much as feel what happened. We knew to get out. And there was already people walking in that stairwell, and we just joined the stream of people who were walking down. I actually didn't take my camera out for the first half hour or so. And, you know, I didn't even remember I had it until I started seeing the firemen coming up. People who were willing to risk their lives for others. and sacrifice themselves in the ultimate way. And how difficult that was. I still can't get my head around that. It was heroic. People were unbelievably gracious to each other. In the stairs, didn't matter what color you were, or didn't care what religion you were. I mean, there were people from every corner of the globe in that building. You know, they all carried themselves in a state of grace.
From ABC News, this is 9/11. Now reporting from New York, Peter Jennings.
We want to talk in this half hour about money. Those of us who have lived in other parts of the world know without a shadow of a doubt that this is the volunteer nation. Volunteerism exists in other countries, but nowhere does it exist to the degree that it does in the United States. And in the wake of 9/11, the volunteer instinct in terms of giving in every imaginable way was just on evidence for everybody in the country to see and to share. The massive outpouring of charitable donations was also unprecedented. 2 out of 3 Americans gave money to help the victims. More than $2 billion was raised by 300 charities. At least that's the best we can do with the number. And of course there were problems. Here's ABC's Cynthia McFadden.
We are forever indebted to the courage of Captain Timothy Stackpole.
When actress Meg Ryan introduced the widow and children of firefighter Timothy Stackpole at the benefit concert for the city of New York, the crowd cheered the fallen hero as his family tried to choke back tears.
Everybody in the audience started to chant his name, and it just was incredible. It was like this giant hug. You felt cared for, you felt loved, you knew you were going to survive.
And with that outpouring of love came a deluge of donations, from telethons and celebrity appeals,
donate money,
to piggy banks and fire booths.
Thank you very much, sir.
The final tally, more than $2.3 billion. But it would turn out to be a lot harder to give it away than it was to collect it.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
First, the big picture. If this silver dollar represents all the money raised, an ABC News survey of 11 major charities shows that about 38 cents on each dollar went to the families of those killed or injured in the form of cash aid. About 32 cents on the dollar was spent on people who lost jobs and others affected by the attacks, as well as services like mental health counseling and legal aid. But that leaves a vast sum, 30 cents on our dollar, or about $690 million, that has not yet been spent. A year ago, this warehouse was filled with grieving family members applying for help. But did the money go where it was most needed, where the public wanted it to go? The answer may be no. A poll by the Chronicle of Philanthropy reveals that 42% of the American public say they have less confidence in charities now than they did before the attack. While dozens of families tell ABC News they are mostly satisfied with the charity's response, a snapshot of 3 families reveals how hard it is to meet both the donors' expectations and the victims' needs. Timothy Stackpole was a captain in the New York City Fire Department.
I didn't want them growing up thinking, well, Daddy died, and look what we got.
For many Americans, it was heroes like Timmy Stackpole who inspired them to donate money. In 1998, he was burned on 30% of his body after rushing into a building to save lives.
I remember just praying to God, just let me die bravely.
He absolutely could have retired and didn't have to work, but he wanted to. That's what he was about.
He was just back, promoted to captain, the day before the planes hit the World Trade Center.
Nobody becomes a fireman to make money. The reason they could do what they did was because they knew that if, God forbid, something happened to them, their families would be taken care of.
As the widow of a firefighter killed in the line of duty, Tara Stackpole knew she was entitled to a $250,000 death benefit and her husband's salary for life. What she didn't count on was the kindness of strangers.
I just couldn't believe that how did I wake up in this position that people felt the need to help me and my family.
It's estimated that the families of the 343 firefighters who died will each receive, on average, over $1 million from charitable organizations. Most other families who lost a loved one will receive a fraction of that, about $175,000. Why? In part because nearly 20% of the money raised, close to $485 million, was given to charities exclusively for the survivors of the uniformed rescue workers.
There have been people who say, look, the firefighters' families are getting too much.
Yeah.
How does that feel?
It's uncomfortable. You know, you feel guilty, you feel like people are watching you all the time. I've heard people say that, oh, the fire widows, they've hit lotto. I mean, that's disgusting. Walk in my shoes for a day and then tell me I hit lotto.
Steve Russin was a bond trader at Cantor Fitzgerald.
He loved children, the toys, the games.
Boom! Big shit up the middle, yeah!
A doting father to his son, Alec, Russin would never meet his twin daughters. They were born 4 days after the towers fell. Andrea Russin never dreamed she would be raising their children alone.
I had formula. I had diapers, so many diapers that I was going to have to buy. And a lot of things that my husband and I had planned for that I was thinking I wasn't going to be able to afford.
With help from caseworkers, Russin spent hours every day pursuing both corporate and charitable donations. In addition to a nanny to help with the twins, the charities have paid for Russin's mortgage, utilities, counseling, day camp, and baby formula for the past year.
I love you too, Daddy.
Still, she wonders if she did enough.
Maybe if I had gone through, spent more time and found more bills, I would have been able to get more. And so some of it is a game.
A frustrating one, especially since she feels the firefighter families receive special treatment.
It's very hurtful to my husband's memory that 3,000 people are not always thought of, and that 300 people have been glorified as heroes.
Russin says she received about $195,000 from 35 different charities. She will also receive her husband's life insurance and Social Security benefits, plus up to $100,000 and health coverage for 10 years from her husband's company.
We're not going out and buying yachts and Lamborghinis with this. We're raising our children forever.
Antonio Melendez was an illegal alien who made less than $18,000 a year working in the kitchen at Windows on the World.
I have to stand on my own 2 feet. If I fall, it's like my husband fell. It's like the Twin Towers falling all over again.
For a week after the attacks, Julia Hernandez searched desperately for her childhood sweetheart and common-law husband, Antonio. He was the family's sole source of support.
You're 28 years old, you have 4 little children, and you're here in this country illegally. Was there a point that you went and asked for help?
Yes. The super came and said the rent's due. I was already a month behind. That's when I went to ask for help with all my expenses.
Hernandez, who speaks almost no English, had no idea what aid she was entitled to or even how to apply.
It's hard because you go to places and they don't speak Spanish. And plus, going with all the kids, and then you take the little one and he gets a little restless and he starts crying.
Nevertheless, Hernandez says she has received about $95,000, plus money for rent, phone, and utilities from 4 major charities. She also gets Social Security benefits, health care coverage for 5 years, counseling, and $15,000 from a life insurance policy provided by Windows on the World.
I haven't lost hope, but I am worried because of my children, for their future.
3 widows, 3 vastly different sums. Is it fair?
It's not fair. In my house, if you have a loaf of bread, We split it up 5 ways, and everybody eats the same. We are all equal.
There is a simplicity that is appealing about taking the pie, dividing it very simply. On the other hand, there's an equally appealing argument that let's try to figure out who needs what so we can make sure the money goes to those who actually need it.
The problem is need itself is a slippery concept, especially after 9/11, when so many victims were so well off. What charities have traditionally tried to do is maintain a family's way of life at the time the tragedy struck, at least in the short run, which is why the widow of a bond trader might have a nanny paid for, while the widow of an undocumented kitchen worker would not. But Andrea Rustin and some other family members we talked to are concerned about something else. Remember, 62% of the money, or $1.4 billion, either hasn't been distributed yet or isn't going directly to the families at all in the form of cash aid.
The American public was so generous and so thoughtful, and I know that they knew about my children and all those other children out there. Where is our trust going to be after this whole thing is over if this money doesn't go to these children?
But the charities point out it wasn't just the children who lost a parent who were affected by September 11th. There are thousands of other victims, like the 55,000 displaced workers, who they also want to help. And there is planning for the future. The United Way, for example, is setting aside $200 million, or nearly half of the money it raised, for the long-term needs of victims, families, and communities.
There is a tension. There are frustrations. There are folks who think that they are rightful beneficiaries who are coming in and saying, we want the money spent immediately. There are others who are saying, let's slow it down to make sure we do it right. Each of these is a logical argument, and the charities are trying to do the right thing.
But what is the right thing? Something special for the boys to have someday?
Yeah.
For families who lost loved ones like Timothy Stackpole, Steve Russin, and Antonio Melendez, there is no easy answer. The only thing that's certain is that the cost of September 11th can never be measured in dollars alone.
If I could put it all together and hand it back to all of them and have Timmy back, I would do that in a heartbeat. They couldn't pay me enough money. Nobody could pay us enough money to replace what we lost.
3 extraordinary families, Peter. You know, one of the great controversial issues is the money that has yet to be spent, the 30 cents on every dollar, as we reported. In doing this report, we talked to the officials who were responsible for monies in Oklahoma City, and they pointed out that they felt it was very important to hold back some of the money because 7 years after Oklahoma City, they're still finding expenses for counseling and other kinds of services that the victims of that tragedy needed.
Well, that's really interesting. I know you're not going anywhere because I want to talk about government in just a moment, but before you do, I want to introduce Daniel Borokoff, who is the president of the American Institute of Philanthropy based in Chicago, and you're basically a watchdog organization, aren't you? You try to keep your eye on charities to see how they're doing. Just a simple question first and a short one. Is there charity fatigue?
Well, disaster fatigue can certainly set in with something as big as this, and that's why we hope there's not another big disaster that happens so soon after the one disaster, because people do start to get fatigued. But
and while I would never want to make the judgment about whether people get enough money, if people need money in America today who've been in some way victimized by this, can they almost invariably get access to money?
Most of them can, but what we're concerned about is the disparity, as you brought out in the piece, that certain victims, certain classes of victims, particularly the brave firefighters and rescue workers, are getting about $1.2 million, whereas you have other people that have lost their employment already on the edge, just getting a few $1,000s. And the charities went overboard raising money for people that were already protected through their jobs, through the Victims' Compensation Fund. So the role of charities here is to fill in the cracks and meet the needs that aren't being met by the far bigger players.
And isn't this in part because people give to those things which make them feel good, and the firefighters and the police were so central to our lives, and the workers, I think from 90 countries, or I've forgotten exactly how many, in the World Trade Towers restaurant up there, some of them even illegal, seemed to fall through the cracks for a while.
Right, because people don't want to think about some of the innocent people and people going through the hardships. And it's harder for the charities to raise money for those people. The charities tend to raise money for people that have the biggest emotional pull. So we have to do is, when we have to ask the charities of the public and say what's really needed, who are the people not getting helped, and insist that the charities help those people, not help people that are already getting a lot of aid.
One last question. I really appreciate your time. How much fraud did you come on?
Very little. So far, maybe $1 million, which isn't much considering it's probably up to $3 billion that it was raised. So there needs to be a lot more coordination. There needs to be a database set in place to kind of root out this fraud so people won't be double dipping.
But $1 million in over $1 billion is...
Yeah, it's very small. There may be more, but yeah, certainly that was fortunate that there wasn't a lot of fraud.
I appreciate you coming.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much. And I want to turn to government now, because it was 10 days after the attack that Congress established what's called the Victims' Compensation Fund. It was created as part of that multi-billion-dollar bailout package for the airline industry. And the aim was to distribute compensation to the families without delay, certainly, but only, this was very important, only if they agreed not to sue the airlines or anyone else in relation to the tragedy. And you may recall the payments to each family would be based on quite an elaborate formula that took several factors into account. I want to ask now, how effective has the fund been? And we're going to turn again to Cynthia McFadden.
This is the Brian. This is the Brian Moss claim. Brian was your husband.
Right.
Your husband.
We were married almost 10 years.
10 years, and he was in the Pentagon on that day, right?
What you are watching is a government official tell a widow how much her husband's life was worth in dollars and cents.
I have to look at the economics. I mean, it's a brutally sort of cold thing to do, but that's the way the statute works. I have to look at the economics of each individual, whether it's a victim or an injured person. Or that.
The widow is Mary Lou Moss. The official is Ken Feinberg, the man in charge of the federal fund that was created by Congress to compensate victims and survivors who lost their loved ones on September 11th. Although Feinberg is legally required to consider certain factors, his discretion is enormous and unprecedented.
These meetings give you a pretty good indication, give or take a little bit, what the number will be.
How does Feinberg put a price tag on each of the lives that were lost on September 11th? He uses a formula that he and his staff created. Here's how it worked for Mary Lou Moss and her 2 children. First, he automatically awards $250,000 for the deceased person's pain and suffering, and $100,000 for the surviving spouse and each dependent. Total, $550,000. Then he calculates the family's lost income, based primarily on the victim's salary when he died. Brian Moss, 34, was making $55,000 a year. Over the course of his career, that would amount to about $1.4 million. Finally, Feinberg is required by law to subtract life insurance, employee pension funds, and other offsets from the award. $550,000. The grand total?
The closest number right now, subject to corroboration, is around $1,450,000.
Feinberg's decisions are final and cannot be reversed by anyone.
I guess I was happier seeing the outcome of this than I anticipated. I anticipated getting a lot less.
Thank you, everybody.
So far, only 175 people of the nearly 3,300 eligible for the fund have completed their applications. The filing deadline is December 2003.
Well, we are joined now by Ken Feinberg, who is the special master of the September 11th Victims' Compensation Fund. Mr. Feinberg, thank you. I'm a little surprised and somewhat admiring that you come out in public, because while a great many people think you're absolutely brilliant and the right person to do this and deeply sympathetic, some of the families think you're the most awful person. I know you know this, so I'm not telling anything surprise. And that you are sort of settling their lives by a formula. Tell me, first of all, how hard's that for you, and which person are you really?
It's very difficult. I didn't fully anticipate the degree of emotion and anger and depression associated with September 11 families until I did what I think you have to do in this job, and that is go out and meet them. There's no substitute I've found in sitting down with the families in groups or individually and hearing what their concerns are, the future, the past, and try and deal with it as best you can with a statute that's fixed.
Do you think it's made you a more sensitive person?
I hope it has.
I realize there's some psychobabble in that question.
Well, I hope it has. It certainly opened my eyes to some of the suffering that September 11 caused.
Now, there are a lot of people who are eligible for money through the Victims' Compensation Fund if they choose. How many have chosen, roughly?
700. about 25%, a little less, have already filed. And the 700 have filed. There are only, Peter, to date, 11 lawsuits. That tells you, I think, the program is working. I predict that by December 2003, you'll have 90% of the families participating in the program.
And why do you think so?
Because, well, there are a couple of reasons. I'd like to think the main reason is that the families will come to realize that the program is unprecedented in its generosity. Congress, no country would do what we've done on this. And I think they'll come to realize that. I also think they'll do it because they want some small degree of psychological closure and move on with their lives after this anniversary. And finally, a technical reason. Congress stacked the deck. Anybody who litigates against the airlines or the World Trade Center will not win the case. They will not win the case. And if they win the case...
Do people actually know that? Do people, some people may be hanging back thinking, yes, I'll sue the airlines and maybe there's justification, and you actually believe that the deck is stacked against them.
Well, I personally don't think they can win the case. Secondly, even if they win after litigating for, in our system, 5, 6, 7 years, they'll have to pay their lawyers 40%. The amount they can recover is capped by Congress. There's not enough money to pay all the claims, even if they did win. In the alternative, they come into this program, and once they accept my award, they get paid tax-free within 20 days.
2 questions. You put people through a 190-page form. There must simply be people who can't do that.
We'll sit down with them. I regret that the form is complicated, but understand, Congress said you must compute economic loss suffered by the victim. Well, computing economic loss case by case by case in which you will receive $1, $2, $3, $4 million tax-free, unfortunately, the application is complicated. We will sit with the families and help them fill out the application.
Am I correct, last question, that the median settlements, the middle settlement so far is $1,348,000?
That's right. Half the people are getting more than $1.3 million, half the people are getting less than $1.3 million. We are, and I think that will continue. I think that at the end of the program, the average award for each of these people, these family members, will roughly be 1.5, 1.8.
What's the lowest amount that anybody's getting?
Anybody who files will get $250,000 no matter what, just for filing the application.
And the most awarded?
Oh, I think we'll have some awards that will be high. I can see
People who made more money will get more money.
That's right. And of course, there's a big debate whether Congress was wise in allowing people to get varying amounts depending on income, but Congress decided that, and will enforce the law as the law was enacted.
I do not envy you. Thank you very much for taking the time to come and see us.
Thank you.
Today, Ken Feinberg, who is the master of the September 11th Fund, Old English title for a very tough job. Thank you.
Thank you.
We want to turn now back to how we responded as a nation to the attacks. I don't know that anybody was surprised after September 11th, but people in other countries were, but there was this astonishingly visible reaction in form of patriotism and solidarity that has not been seen in the country probably since World War II. Expressions of it were everywhere. We're seeing it again now on the anniversary in the form of the American flag.
I want to give you a sense of what it's like here in Times Square right now. Because if you look outside, we have hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of people standing outside, just stopping still, a kind of respectful witness, looking up at the screens where we're broadcasting the pictures. They can't hear the sound. They are simply looking at the wordless horror and standing to show, in a way, respect. And I want to show you something else, because people have been sent home from Times Square, and across the way, the construction workers who were building the Toys R Us building next door to us just hung their signs outside. God bless America, and pray for families and victims.
This is the White House, the flag on the flagstaff at the White House. Boy, that'll happen all over the country now, being lowered to half staff.
Terrorist attacks can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but they cannot touch the foundation of America.
And so this scene on the steps of the Capitol building tonight, just as the sun was going down, was very, very moving.
From the mountains to the prairie, to the ocean, wide we roam. God bless America.
In some respects, that's an even more touching moment today, because Linda Douglas, our Capitol Hill correspondent, reviewed for us earlier how much tension there was in the leadership of the Congress just before that all occurred, and they were quite upset at the vice president. The leadership had all been taken away and put in safe and secure places. And everybody sort of being politicians and being political leaders, particularly, everybody thought they might want to be in charge. And they came together on the steps, and it was a magnificent moment. Do you remember how much we talked in the ensuing days after September 11th about the impact on American culture? How would Hollywood react? How would Broadway react? One magazine editor at the time declared that irony was dead. Comedians, remember, Dave Letterman included them, Jon Stewart, and others questioned when it would be appropriate to laugh again, and it took them a long time to come back and be themselves, all the while we needed them. The film industry was reassessing, at least at the time, the kind of films that it had in production. But like a lot else about this story, those people who predicted a major transformation of American culture, wrong. Here's ABC's David Wright.
At first, there was culture shock. The trivial and the vain were banished for a while. Commotion simmered down.
9/11, more than anything else, was a disruption of our cultural narrative, of the story we use to understand who we are. It was a shock to the system.
It's terribly sad here in New York City. We've lost 5,000 fellow New Yorkers, and you can feel it. You can feel it. You can see it. It's terribly sad.
Pretty soon, levity became a patriotic duty.
New York City is open for business. Saturday Night Live is one of our great New York City institutions, and that's why it's important for you to do your show tonight.
Can we be funny?
Why start now?
Sometimes a little awkwardly, pop culture struggled to connect.
All right, now it's our turn to help.
After September 11th, we were trying to make sense of it all, searching for meaning. It was a time that separated the artists from the mere celebrity.
Without your sweet kiss, my soul is lost, my friend. Tell me, how do I begin again? My city's in ruin.
You're simply writing in a new world. You're living in a new world. The world was very different. And what you were thinking and the way you were writing was contextualized by new experience and by the experiences that everyone had on that day.
Addressing the tragedy directly was hard.
Where were you when the world stopped turning that September day?
Country singer Alan Jackson, for one, felt a little uncomfortable when a song he wrote late one night and performed for the first time at the Country Music Awards shot his new album to the top of the country charts.
Did you feel guilty cause you're a survivor? In a crowded room, did you feel alone?
I just didn't know if I wanted to write a song about it, first of all, because I didn't want it to look like I was using some tragedy to benefit from it, you know, my career, and I didn't want to come across that way at all.
Hollywood, too, has struggled, not sure of just what note to strike.
This is one of those things that is just too serious, too scary.
Television has tried, directly.
Are you telling me the Kumari defense minister may have ordered an attack on the Golden Gate Bridge?
We're not ready to say.
Or obliquely.
But we have to show them a good time. It's our patriotic duty as women of New York.
Many producers have tipped their hats to the victims of 9/11. On the final episode of Ally McBeal, Ally moves to New York. Her parting gift?
It's a necklace. It's the remains of the Trade Center.
It's beautiful.
This is the necklace, designed by producer David E. Kelly's sister-in-law, Rona Pfeiffer. After the broadcast, dozens of them were auctioned off on eBay, and the proceeds went to benefit the victims of the terror attacks. Movies don't seem to have changed much at all.
As far as the movie industry, it would seem that the net effect of September 11th was nil.
Movies are still as violent as ever, but the violence seems abstract because the villains are so unreal. Notice how the terrorists in movies don't ever look like Osama bin Laden.
There's almost a perverse desire on the part of Hollywood to whitewash, it seems to me, the connection between militant Islam and world terrorism.
Little by little, the culture is absorbing all this, processing it, even laughing at its absurdity.
We are now under the auspices of Homeland Security,
And they had to be very careful picking that name, Homeland Security. You couldn't say Fatherland because a lot of old Germans are going, that's a good one.
Who am I?
1 year later,
I'm Spider-Man.
Pop culture overwhelmingly betrays our nostalgia, our wish to get back to the way things were before. This summer, conspiracy, fear, and survival were once again forms of entertainment. Reality as an escape from reality. David Wright, ABC News, Hollywood.
We're all in the country different about this. We all have different temperature levels about this. Some people wanted Letterman to come back even before he came back. Jon Stewart, the same. And I think it was Charles Krauthammer, the columnist, if it wasn't, I apologize, who wrote recently in one of these reappraisals on the first anniversary, American frivolity is one of the world's joys. It is the expression of an unprecedented happiness, and so we should never be self-conscious about it. Mr. Krauthammer, I think it was his point of view. One thing we know about September 11th, it has been the most documented moment in American history. Immediately after September 11th, several museums across the country began to collect artifacts from the day. These are very different artifacts in many respects than you're accustomed to seeing in a museum. Many are personal items, including clothing, cell phones, even emails. It's been a very difficult task for some of the curators at the Smithsonian particularly, and today in Washington, some of those artifacts went on display at the Smithsonian National Museum of American History as part of an exhibit which is actually called Bearing Witness to History. ABC's Michelle Norris has been over there for part of the day. I haven't seen the exhibit. I know we're a little bit part of it in some respects, but it must be very moving for you.
Peter, it's extraordinary. The Smithsonian is home to many of the nation's artifacts, which tell us what it really means to be an American. What's interesting about this, what's extraordinary really, is that the museum had to collect history as it happens. And we'll walk through and show you some of this here. As you said, the museum, the installation here is called Bearing Witness to History. And the gallery here will look a little bit empty, which is unusual because it's been packed all day long. The exhibit opened today. They've had 5,000 visitors so far. It is the single largest opening of an exhibit here at the Smithsonian.
Really?
In many ways, because we're here in Washington, this is the heart of the exhibit. What you see here is, it used to be a television. It is now twisted steel and rubber. And in the Navy Command Center in the Pentagon, workers were watching the television, watching the events unfold at the World Trade Center in New York when a plane struck their building. And many of the people who lost their lives in the Pentagon were right there in that center. Here we see a red door. This belonged to a rescue truck that was right outside the Pentagon when the plane hit. Two workers crouched behind this truck, and actually the truck shielded them from danger. The blast was so strong that it actually blew the back end of the truck off. The exhibit shows us in many ways how everyday items have become extraordinary, and even small items speak to the moments of extreme heroism. What you see here is actually the handle for a squeegee. A window washer was stuck at the 50th floor, had no way to get out, used the squeegee to carve through 3 layers of sheetrock so he and 5 other men could crawl through this little teeny opening, work their way down to the bottom floor, and they escaped the building. They got out just 5 minutes before the building collapsed altogether.
Let me interrupt you for just 1 second, because it's a fascinating tour. Has the Smithsonian been inundated by stuff?
Actually, it's been relatively easy for them to collect items because Congress asked them specifically to collect artifacts. So, you know, it's not always easy to get places like the Pentagon to contribute items, but they've found it to be quite easy, and people have been more than willing to participate in this exhibit.
Why don't you go on for a minute?
Well, one of the things that we wanted to show you here is another example of how everyday items take on extreme significance. What you see here is a telephone, and this is the phone that Ted Olson, the country Solicitor General of the United States, where he received those last calls from his wife, Barbara Olson, who was aboard Flight 77. And we're going to take you around the corner here, and what you see here are items from the World Trade Center. And for people who have not found their way to New York, who've only seen this on TV, this steel column from the 70th floor gives you a real sense of the destruction from that day. We also see the truck from Fire Truck, one of the first squads to respond that day, Brooklyn Fire Squad number 1. They lost 12 firefighters that day, and then the last of this, one of the few remnants they actually found from the planes that struck the building that day.
Michelle, let me just ask you one last question, because I almost missed it. I assume they've cleared the place out so that you could work in there, which
Yes.
is very nice. But you said this was the largest opening they'd ever had at Smithsonian?
So far, they've had 5,000 people come through. When they opened this morning at 10 a.m., there were 50 people waiting at the front door. And it's in many ways, when we as journalists talk about stories, we talk about a story or the story. This exhibit shows that there are many, many stories, and people come through, they're asked to leave a remembrance when they leave, to write down what the day meant to them, how their lives have changed. It's really quite extraordinary.
Interesting. Thank you very much, Michelle Norris, at the Smithsonian. Interesting way for people to connect on this particular day. We will be back. More than 300 search and rescue dogs were brought into work through the hazardous debris of Ground Zero. Many dogs suffered from cut paws and stinging eyes and problems breathing. Only one service dog was known to be lost. He was a bomb-sniffing dog with the Port Authority Police, and his kennel was in the South Tower.
ABC News, 9/11 continues. Once again, Peter Jennings.
Just before we go on, I want to correct not correct something, I just want to add something, because, you know, as we listen to the names being read today here, not at the Pentagon, but also out in Pennsylvania, we realized how important this was to people, and when we were giving some details about one person or another, we actually missed someone who was really very important, and his name is Don DeFranco. He was 43 years old, and he worked for us. He was the WABC television transmission supervisor at the top of the World Trade Tower, where, until September 11th, all of the television stations in town had their transmitters. He was on the 110th floor. He was working alone at the transmitter site. He was a dedicated human being. And we didn't hear his family didn't hear his name mentioned today. And we just mentioned it. Proud to do so. Proud to do so. We have met some remarkable people who have been touched in so many different ways by these attacks, and they've all got remarkable stories to tell. Don's among them. You're going to hear some of them in this particular half hour, and we're going to begin with those who were involved in the recovery effort at Ground Zero. And we said a couple of times that this is very intimate to those of us who live in New York, but at the time, you'll recall, the whole world was engaged in this. Now, the workers who've spoken to us have all say they have been profoundly changed by this experience. Many of them share similar feelings of survivor guilt. We talked a little bit about that with a psychologist earlier today. She said it was perfectly normal. A lot of people share a sense of failure because they did not recover more bodies. We're helped in this particular segment by a photographer named David Margulis. He was among a handful of people who were granted access to what became known as the pit. It became very much off limits for a long time, but over several months he and many of the workers themselves documented the physical as well as the emotional toll of working there. And this is the first-hand account from 9 of the workers.
My first time there, I just stopped and my jaw dropped.
You felt the heat underneath your feet, and the steam would make it unbearable to breathe.
I hated being down there, but then when I left, I wanted to go back.
My name is David Margulis. I'm a photographer. The workers down at Ground Zero were people at their finest. Men and women working way beyond their mental and physical capacities. Though they were firemen and policemen and others, they didn't have to be down there. They volunteered to be down there. I found out what these people were all about, and they said they would show to the world what we're doing.
I got there the second day. Basically started crying the minute I got there. It was something I'll never forget.
It was like just chaos. Nobody really knew what to do, but we were there to do whatever we could do to help.
I went down on my day off. We found a spot. We started digging. Whatever you picked up with your hands, you put in the bucket and passed the bucket back.
The fatigue level was incredible. The heat was intense.
And I remember the first night, the bottom of my shoes started to melt.
I didn't see a desk. I didn't see a chair. I didn't see a computer screen. I didn't see anything that resembled anything. Everything was just pulverized.
In the beginning, there was no such thing as a 12-hour day. It was work until you dropped.
I tell you who was really kicking tail there, the iron workers. Initially, those weeks, they were the guys who were allowing everybody else to do their jobs.
Hey, man, you tell me where you want to get. I'll burn it, push it, pry it, get a crane in here, whatever it takes, and make it happen.
The dedication was incredible. They were going to be down there until they pulled out the last body.
When you'd get off your shift and you'd walk out, the people would come up with those pictures. Remember, like, this is my son or this is my daughter. Call me anytime you want.
I personally saw a four-star chief of the police department. He was down there digging on his hands and knees. I saw a lot of old firemen. As I looked into it, later on I found out they were there digging for their kids.
Some mornings you'd come in and you'd see the night crew and you'd say, how'd it go? They didn't find a thing all night. And you'd be like, wow, nothing?
Sometimes we'd find ID, and you'd take out someone's wallet and you'd look at their picture and their driver's license. You'd compare that to what was before you. And it was so hard.
You know, we bring them out, and you put a flag on them, you say a prayer, and you give the man respect. It's a beautiful thing, showing respect. January 1st, we pulled 11 firemen out. It was an incredible day. It was a great day.
What I saw was the human spirit at its finest. To take the worst catastrophic situation that we've ever had, and these people trying to make it better for somebody else.
We did the best job we could down there. Everyone I'd met, everyone's heart was in what had happened.
The digging is over, but the emotional suffering will probably never be over.
I hated being there, but it was the biggest honor of my life. We brought them home. We brought people home to their families. From the bowels of hell, we brought them home.
When we were listening to the names being read at Ground Zero today, we noticed, which we actually knew before, that there were 39 sets of twins who perished on the day. And the surviving twins are clearly suffering a loss unlike any other, because twinship, as they sometimes call it, is a unique relationship. We asked ABC's Deborah Roberts to explore this.
Just imagine, if you would, the Twin Towers standing there before they were destroyed. And imagine one of the buildings that was hit and it was burnt out, still standing, but severely damaged, and the other one's gone.
Imagine what it's like to be Greg Hoffman, who lost his identical twin brother Stephen on September 11th. Stephen worked for the bond trading firm Cantor Fitzgerald in the North Tower. What was always two, inseparable from birth, is now one.
We always had that unspoken understanding that we were best friends, that we were there for one another, that we were part of the same, not the same person, but we were connected in a very unique way, in a special way.
Like many twins, Greg and Steve did everything together. They went to the same schools, got jobs in finance, coached youth football, married their college sweethearts.
This is the deal. When you marry Greg, you get Steve. And when you marry Steve, you get Greg.
They thought they would have each other for a lifetime. So, when twins like Greg suddenly lost their other half last September, it was a loss like no other. That morning, Greg was at his desk at Merrill Lynch in Queens. Stephen was in his office on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center. Do you remember the last conversation that you had with Stephen?
Yeah. It was on the 11th. It was just after 9 o'clock, 9:01. Dialed the cell phone. He picked up, and he's like, "Greg, is that you?" And I go, "Steve, it's Greg. Are you okay?" And he's like, "Greg?" And I go, "Yeah, Steve, it's me." And at that moment, I'm watching my computer screen, and I watch the other plane come bashing into the other building. And the last thing he said was, "Oh, my God, look at that." The phone went dead. And that was the last time I had a conversation with Stephen.
I played girls basketball, my sister and I. We were the original Twin Towers. When Linda McGee and her twin sister Brenda were growing up, they were so close, people referred to them in one breath as Brenda Linda.
Living a life by myself is going to take some getting used to. I'm not used to the I thing, being just me.
Last year, they celebrated their 40th birthdays together. This year, there was nothing to celebrate.
All my life, I've had someone to share this birthday with, and now I'm by myself. So that was kind of hard. I just stayed in. I refused to do anything. And I found it very, very hard to try to have a birthday without her.
I know that they were around either the north or the south. I know they were around somewhere around here.
Twin New York firefighters Zachary and Andre Fletcher were both ordered to the trade towers on September 11th. Zach was spared. Andre was part of an elite rescue squad that was last seen speeding toward the South Tower.
I said, I'll see you down there. Look for me. He says, I will. He says, make sure you look for me. I'll see you down there. And that was it. Last words I ever heard from him.
The loss of a twin is going to be a lifetime of effort. I don't think any twin has ever really gotten over the loss of the twin completely.
Nancy Siegel, a twin herself, studies twins and twin loss.
They have had this relationship from the moment of birth. And suddenly to step into the world without the other twin there is a new and unfamiliar and foreign landscape that they don't understand.
A number of them began to gather last February to talk, to tell stories of their twinship. Some are even attending special twin therapy sessions together. Only other twins, they say, understand what they miss.
Being with the twins and just being able to open up in a way that you necessarily can't open up with a spouse has been a saving grace and a blessing for me.
Would you say your relationship, your bond with your twin, was still stronger somehow than that of your spouse?
Definitely.
Without doubt.
All of you?
Unquestionably. It's a different type of bond.
And now Zach, Linda, and Greg feel a particular responsibility to be there for the children of their departed twins. Greg has been teaching his niece Madeline to surf alongside his daughter Madison.
Everybody says, are you sisters? And we're like, no, we're identical cousins.
Actually, the girls are not far off the mark because their fathers were identical twins, genetic carbon copies of each other. So remarkably enough, genetically speaking, Madeline is as closely related to Greg as his own daughter, which may help explain their special bond.
Does it bother her that you look so much like her dad?
You know what? I'm sure it's sometimes more, I think it's more good than bad because I think the one thing she'll get at that, she'll get to see someone who looks almost just like her dad as he would have looked growing older.
As for the twins themselves, each look in the mirror is a reminder of their missing part.
There's so much potential, so many dreams that are just squashed. So many things we want to do together as twins.
I just always assumed she would always be there. We always said when we get older together, we're going to live together. We're going to be together. We just assumed we would just always be together.
The twinless twins of September 11th are struggling to move forward, trying to honor the memory of their twinship.
We're the ones left to carry their dreams and their banner and what they died for, our freedom and all these things on. It's not easy. It's very, very hard sometimes, but you know, that's what we have to do.
Reminded again of how many people have spoken to us today and have been so eloquent about their pain and their challenges. The other day I asked a room of kids if they knew exactly where they were when the planes hit the trade tower and the Pentagon. Their hands all flew up. I don't know that I should have been surprised, but I was, and made me think, of course, that in another generations, people knew exactly where they were when John F. Kennedy was assassinated and exactly where they were when the Challenger explosion occurred. And of course, it's that way with the trade towers. Robert Krulwich has a story now about a man who, when it happened, was caught in a traffic jam.
It's odd, really, but now that they're gone, it's hard to remember where the towers were.
They would stand up. Chase is 82 floors. You see the rectangular building there? 82 floors. We were 20 floors higher, just to the right of that.
Guy knows because 40 years ago, he was called in by his boss at the New York, New Jersey Port Authority.
And he says, Guy, now we have to build this thing. And he said, you're in charge. You're going to be in charge. I'm going to create a super department called the World Trade Department.
And that was the beginning of an extraordinary relationship.
Those towers were an identity for me. It was like the world was okay. They were there, and I'll be there. I've been in them since they started when we moved in.
Guy is not a native New Yorker, though you wouldn't know it.
Do people ever think you're from Kansas City?
No, they believe I'm from New York. They say that. I hear that all the time. And I'm not. I'm from New Jersey, but maybe it's the same.
But what are they? What is it? Is it the vowels or the gravel?
I haven't the slightest idea. It might be the gravelly voice that I have. I can't help it. You know, over the years, I talk a lot, probably.
40 years ago, Guy was a young engineer working for the agency that built bridges and docks in New York's harbor. And in those days, as today, Lower Manhattan was in big trouble. People were leaving, businesses were leaving. So the businesses down there wanted a project to revitalize the neighborhood. David Rockefeller, who ran the Chase Manhattan Bank, and Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York, came up with the notion for a World Trade Center. And after convincing the governor of New Jersey, the project was eventually assigned to Guy Tozzoli.
I was in New York, the greatest city in the world. There was only one thing to do.
What?
Make a program for the largest project in the world.
Guy decided, and it was Guy more than the governors, that the project should have 12 million feet of office space and a plaza and a huge parking garage and shops and a mall.
The Reader's
What,
Digest.
New York, it has to be big?
Yes, absolutely. If you want it to be successful, Lower Manhattan was dying. It needed an anchor. It needed something around which people could build.
And what, like Frank Sinatra's singing in your head? Something about biggest town, big city, big.
New York is big, big, big. It always has been. It's a great city. It's the greatest city in the whole world.
Early on, Guy decided not to go just for a big building. He wanted the biggest buildings, the biggest in the world, as he told his neighbor.
He said, Biz, you know something? This is going to be big. He said, this is going to be really something big. And he said, it's going to be something that'll last.
And so in the late 1960s, the towers began to rise. Thousands of workers swarmed to the sites, putting up those signature frames that would become the skin of the buildings. And then, matter-of-factly, a quarter mile up in the air, they sat, they welded, they stood, backs to the wild air. Stop the tape. Look at that. The weather changed constantly.
In the wintertime, there's ice up there, there's snow, there's rain, it's cold, 5 degrees, 10 degrees. When it's 20 degrees in the street and you're up 84 floors, it's like it's 10 below, you know? So, and the wind factor is very bad, even right now on that side on the wall over there. You can hardly work over there.
But they kept going. Guy in charge, holding meetings all day long that lasted 17 minutes. That was his rule.
17?
Yes. I don't know why I picked 17.
Yeah, it's not a round number.
No. But that was it. You want an answer, you come in and tell me in 17 minutes.
He was building, he was leasing, he was politicking, and he was doing some public relations work. He got some girls from his Jersey neighborhood to be tour guides, and they had to memorize a speech.
And people listened. It was like, whoa.
Can you remember the opening line?
Yes. It's, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the site of the World Trade Center.
What if it were like 11 a.m.?
Hmm?
Did you do temporal changes?
No, it was
Time
always
of day?
afternoons, because they came out at afternoon for lunch. Yeah.
Okay.
It was like
Once
like
again,
the lunch
good
show.
afternoon, ladies
Good
and gentlemen.
afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the site of the World Trade Center, future home of trade and commerce.
We want people to start to like the World Trade Center.
So?
Yes, we were looking for attractive young ladies to give their spiel. There's nothing bad about that.
Now, was there a
outdoor
dating
job.
rule? Were you allowed to date people working on
Nobody
the
said
site?
we couldn't.
Ah.
And so we
Oh,
did.
so there are fringes here that I haven't...
benefit. No,
I
but there was the guys, the workers were very protective of us.
They took him up on open elevators, 110 stories, just to see the view. But what Liz particularly remembers is the bottom, the foundation, the hole that they dug deep down, walled against the Hudson River.
I think of that pit. And I think of how hard they worked to make that foundation as strong as it could possibly be. Anything that was even minutely wrong with that foundation, they would tear it out and do it again because they knew it had to be just so. And when I think of the World Trade Center, I think of that first. And then I think about how everybody else thinks about it.
When the building opened, Guy moved in.
Where's your office?
My office is on the north face.
On the 77th floor.
Right.
So when you look out, you look
I used to look right down on Manhattan. It was beautiful.
And he stayed. And when he retired, he stayed again. He ran the Association of World Trade Centers from an office in the same tower. And then came September.
Were you as surprised as everybody else when the buildings fell down?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The last thing in my mind was that this building would ever collapse.
Guy saw the towers fall from across the river. He'd been caught in a morning traffic jam.
There is no question. If I had gotten to the building, I'd be dead today. I would have stayed in that building. I tried like mad. I talked to Port Authority police at the Holland Tunnel to let me get through that tunnel. I wanted to go and help, okay? And help people out. Whatever I could do. This was my project.
It was his project, but not only his. When Liz and Jane saw the site, the first thing they saw was the wall that their boyfriends had built 30 years before.
I said, there's the wall that they worked so hard on, and it is there. And that meant a tremendous amount to me, that the whole thing came down, but when they cleaned it all out, it was there just like they built it. Right. And I know that probably sounds really stupid, but...
Because she and Jane had been there at the very beginning, at the birth.
And I thought about being there, sort of, it was my World Trade Center. Right.
And it was his, and it was his, and most of all, it was his.
It's hard to remember now. There was a huge amount of resistance to the World Trade Towers when they were first proposed, and now, of course, the city and ultimately, I think, the country will be deeply embroiled in, we hope, a positive way about what is built in its stead, what kind of memorial it will be. The city and all concerned families very deeply involved in this, approaching it so far with a deep sense of commitment and responsibility. Some of you may remember that a year ago after the disaster, I spent a couple of hours talking to children. And I raised it only because they were really stunning at the time, and so many of us heard from them answers about everything from tragedy to survival to bigotry to foreign policy, in which young, very often innocent people can only speak. This year, for the anniversary, we asked some of them to come back and talk to us again. And in the next half hour, and I'll appear somewhere else briefly because we did it a day or so ago, we'll spend about half an hour with some of those children. In the meantime, remember a year ago today how many people they were trying to evacuate across the rivers from Lower Manhattan. An estimated 300,000 people were evacuated from Lower Manhattan to Staten Island and New Jersey on the morning of September 11th. Hundreds of ferries, boats from government agencies, tugboats, historic ships. They all responded to the U.S. Coast Guard's emergency radio call. All available boats.
Requesting any available assistance at Pier 11 Manhattan to help evacuate. Your help would be appreciated.
The subways were down, the bridges, they closed the bridges down. We were basically the only way out. I couldn't believe the amount of tugboat. You know, I guess they realized the same thing we did, that those people had to get out.
The boats were used to transport supplies as well and carried firefighters, police, medical and emergency services to Ground Zero. An exhibit at the South Street Seaport Museum in New York documents the operation, which continued for weeks. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us for this particular portion of our day-long broadcast on this first anniversary. This is a particularly important broadcast to some of us because it was last year, after 9/11, when we invited a number of kids and some adults to come in and talk to us about an event which was so extraordinarily raw for all of us. And we were immensely struck. I think everybody in the country who saw it was immensely struck by the wisdom that was exhibited by some of the kids who were with us on that particular day. We've invited some of them back to help us get through another day. First, here's some of what they said last year.
I can't believe this has happened. It's very scary.
Every time I see airplanes, I get really nervous.
It's hard talking to your parents.
You're like, what's gonna happen next, you know?
Is my mom gonna come, or is she okay? And I didn't know.
I don't really get, like, what did we do? Like, we didn't do anything. Why'd they do it? Why'd they do it?
What has the United States done to install such hatred into these people's hearts?
We created them. Because we made the guns. We sold the guns. People here shouldn't label other people just because of what their nationalities are. This was an organization, not a nation. I know that he's special, but I want him to be special here because he's always gone, and he's going to be gone even more since that they did this. I know that it was a big wake-up call for our country, and they're trying to make us be terrified of them.
Well, some of those kids and some of those adults, as I said, are back with us today. And so let's just begin. Justin, you were here with us last year. How do you think we're doing?
I think we're doing better as individuals because we're much more prepared if something else would happen.
Kamayed, nice to see you again. Hey? You don't look any different from last year either. How are you feeling these days?
Well, I feel much better than I did right after it happened. I talked to my parents a lot, and they made me feel much better. And I'm still a bit scared, but I know that, well, I know that you can't, if we just hit our heads and we're really afraid and just didn't face the danger, then, you know, what's the point of life then? We wouldn't be having any fun. And that wouldn't be good. And then the terrorists who did this to us would be succeeding and would be doing what they wanted to do to us, and we don't want that to happen.
Thank you. Andrew?
I think it's shown everybody that there are really evil people in the world who won't stop, and I think it's shown a lot of younger people what the price of freedom is.
Is anybody still concerned, still feeling vulnerable? Michael?
I'm still, like, afraid of flying planes. After 9/11, I haven't rode on a plane since. I just won't go.
I'd like to talk for a moment and see what the level of your interest is about this question of safety in the country, which brings us to Lisa Stark, who covers more about safety, I think, than anybody else. You worry about airports, you worry about transportation. How safe is it these days to fly in America?
I do think it's safer than it was a year ago on September 11th. I think it's safer for some of the reasons we've talked about. The planes are more fortified, you have stronger cockpit doors, you have people more aware that aren't going to let a terrorist take over a plane. Is it 100% safe? I don't think anyone could say that. I don't think anything's 100% safe, and I think they have some things they still need to do to make it safer, and they're working on those things.
Was that on, like, 9/11 that we were, like, sleeping? We weren't, like, really aware of what was going on. We weren't, like, ready for what could happen.
You know, when you look back at things, sometimes things seem really clear. And I think when you look back, there were signs that say people could use planes in this way. But I don't think anyone had put the puzzle together. And there's a lot of question about whether they should have or not.
Gracie?
What were you thinking, like, the first time you went in a plane after September 11th?
I was nervous about it. I was watching everyone on the plane very carefully. And, you know, I was thinking about what could be used as a weapon on the plane if I had to do something. And I was watching all my travelers to say, who could I call for help? And I was watching who was going up near the cockpit. And I think other people on the plane were too. And I still do that when I get on planes. And I think if you're on an airplane and something's happening, everyone on that plane, your mom, your dad, every other passenger is going to get up and tackle the guy or the girl who's doing something. So I think everyone's going to stop them from taking over the plane. That wasn't the attitude a year ago because we didn't think something like this could happen. And people just sat in their seats. except for Flight 93.
Flight 93, which crashed in Pennsylvania, they did have a cockpit voice recorder, and indeed members of the family have heard it, and I think they're the only ones to have heard it other than the investigators. You don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but Joanna's brother was on Flight 93. And did you hear the tape?
My sister-in-law and my mother heard them, and they both told me at one point of the tape they turned to each other and they heard my brother's voice, so they said it was very moving.
Make a difference to you to make that connection?
I knew that he was a hero before they told me what they had heard on the tape, so what they had told me didn't really change my opinion.
What have you been doing for the last year?
I have started the Caring Crew, which is...
The Caring Crew?
Caring Crew. It's it's just getting started now. We are forming all these teenagers together who are going to help the families babysitting or mowing the lawn and anything that they need us to do, and we're going to help the victims, the families, and the children.
Sort of like the Peace Corps and the Freedom Corps
Yes.
as well. You know, you remind me that one of the people here from last year is Calvin Butts from the Abyssinian Baptist Church. Do you find a huge difference in the last year of people wanting to do things for other people as a result of all this?
I think there's been a profound difference in people's spirituality. For instance, it's connected to what you just mentioned about volunteering and helping. More people, in terms of their own spirits, have been moved to help, not only with regard to direct action regarding September 11th, but just in all areas. Responding to poverty, counseling with young people, tutoring after school, because more people feel a sense of urgency about what we need to give. Moreover, it has made us all much more profoundly aware of the existence of evil in our world. I think people had tended to forget about evil, or at least characterize it as the exorcist, you know, possessing a little girl in a bedroom. But it's certainly much more profound than that. And young people particularly have to deal with the age-old, millennia-old question of why do bad things happen to good people?
Well, that's a tough one. Michael, you've had your hand up there looking like a flagpole.
I have a question for Joanne.
Okay.
When you found out that your brother was on the plane, what were you thinking?
I was at school, and my mother came to pick me up, and she told me right away that my brother was on a hijacked plane. And I was more shell-shocked, I think, than anything else. I just kind of said, okay, let me go get my bag. And I ran and got my bag, and we got in the car. It didn't really hit me till a couple of days later that I wasn't going to see my brother again. And I think I watched every member of my family, break down to tears. But I think now we've kind of formed a unit, and I feel like the American people have come together, and that's really helped.
This wonderful expression all the time of the American people coming together. Max.
I have a question for the lieutenant of the in the fire company. A friend of my dad's was one of the 12 firefighters found in the collapsed staircase. And ever since September 11th, I've been interested in what firefighters were thinking that day. So my question for you is, if you could have, what would you have chosen to do differently that day?
Not much I could have done differently. The circumstances were beyond, my control and the control of the fire department.
Well, that's Ray Brown. He's a lieutenant in the New York City Fire Department. And I just want to show you a little picture of him, because that's him in the middle, being carried away from Ground Zero, or being helped away from Ground Zero by two of his colleagues. I think we all know deep in our bones just how the New York Fire Department and other rescue workers suffered on that particular day, and how when so many people were running out of the buildings, people like Lieutenant Brown and others were running into the buildings. I don't think we ever get over how absolutely astonishing that is. What's the day's story of your company?
We responded after the second plane hit.
You're from Brooklyn, right?
From Brooklyn, yes. And we responded to the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. And then we got our orders to report to a staging area on Liberty and West Street. In about 5 minutes there, we were on our way into the South Tower when that collapsed. We all scattered. I ran. I tried to run across the street, and I was, fortunate. There were people to the right and left of me that were getting hit and were getting killed.
I know the kids have got some questions for you, but I have one, because you were found, I think, because of one of your firefighter's tools, right? Your light?
Correct, yes.
Have you got, and I see you've got it with you. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah. Well, after we survived the first collapse, I went back to my fire truck, and the guys from my company were there. And, well, first let me say that I never felt so proud in my whole life, because they were there, and they said, okay, Lou, what do we do? We just survived hell, and they wanted to know what we're going to do. So I ran into a chief I know, and he told me that there were firefighters trapped in the Marriott Hotel. So we went into the Marriott Hotel, and we were within 5 feet of Lieutenant Bob Nagel, and we were talking to him, and we were in the process of trying to save him when the second tower came down. And I have no memory of what happened after that point, but when all the guys, everybody scattered again, and they wanted to know, like, they were calling out names, and then they kept asking for me, and I wasn't answering. And then they saw my light. They saw the beam from my light, and miraculously, I was thrown into the reinforced area of the Marriott Hotel. And as we've seen in several pictures, that was the only area that anybody, if you weren't in that little reinforced area, you didn't survive. And
I know a lot of kids have got questions for you. Jason.
I just want to know, like, when the first plane hit, what was going through your mind, and what were you, like, really thinking about when it happened?
Well, at the time, I didn't think that my company was going to respond. We're in Brooklyn. But since I had worked in Manhattan for 6 years, a lot of my fellow firefighters were trying to ask me for advice and just my opinion on what they thought was happening and how we were going to put that fire out. But I knew right from the get-go that we weren't putting that fire out.
Yes?
Are you ever afraid of going to work anymore?
Well, that's a good question.
That's a real good question. Yeah. I've always been afraid, a little bit afraid. I've had a lot of friends die over the years. But, that's what I do. That's my job, and I love my job.
I think you have said to us on several times now that what got you through this year were kids. What do you mean by that?
When I got to the hospital and when I started back getting into my life again, the hugs and kisses and pats on the back and cards and letters and quilts, it was just amazing. It was amazing. It was, I learned, how much pain that the human heart can withstand. But I also learned how much love can absorb.
All these things in the studio were done by kids. All these wonderful and sometimes frightening montages. And these quilts which were here have been gathered all together and now put up at the New York Historical Society. So they'll be kept in perpetuity for a long time. Yes, Charlotte, do you have a question?
I was wondering if Saddam bin Laden...
Say again?
Saddam bin Laden...
Osama bin Laden?
Yeah, is dead or not.
Charlotte, you really put your finger on something quite fascinating, because there are people who think he's alive in the government, and there are people who think he's dead. And the question is, does it make any difference one way or the other? We have Martha Raddatz with us, who covers the Pentagon and the State Department for us in Washington. Martha, let me ask you that. Does the government think Osama bin Laden is dead or alive, or it just plain doesn't know?
I think it just plain doesn't know. And I think the reason they think
more that he's alive is because they have no evidence that he's dead. They haven't heard any sort of chatter saying, oh, we've lost our leader. They certainly have seen no evidence that he's dead. So I think they're leaning on the side of believing he's still alive. And they have no idea where he is. Oftentimes during the last year, we'd hear all kinds of different stories. He's in this area, he's in this area. They do believe he was in one particular area when the United States was doing its heaviest bombing, so they thought they might have gotten him, but they're just not sure. But the thing I always think of in an encouraging way is that when you're playing hide and seek and you can't find somebody, that person who's hiding often can't operate very well either. They can't eat as well, they can't make phone calls, they can't do all the things that are really scary when they're hiding like that.
Now, I want you to, you're sitting beside your son, Jake, so I'd love to know what Jake thinks about all this. Jake, what do you think? You listen to your mother talk all the time. You got any impressions?
Well, personally, I think that he's still alive, but I think we'll catch him soon because we've narrowed him down, and I think when we do catch him, it'll be really good.
I just want to just ask the kids a question first. How many of you think it makes a difference if Osama bin Laden is dead or alive? Is it, yeah, it does make it. Why do you think it makes a difference? Mics are down this end, right?
Well, really, I think it's good if he's dead, because then we'd know that he'd be gone for good, unless somehow they clone him or something, if they have that power. And except if he's gone, then all of his allies, if he did have like an ally in Iraq or something, if they had the nuclear missiles, then they might shoot some at us.
Mandy?
Osama bin Laden is not the only terrorist in the world. There's so many others. So if he was dead, yeah, it would make a small difference. But you have to consider the fact that there's so many other terrorists around the world.
I was wondering if the people in Afghanistan were trying to help Osama bin Laden hide, or trying to help us find him.
Oh, that's a very interesting question. Do you mind if I direct that question to somebody else? I think Martha Raddatz is the one to answer that because she pays pretty close attention to Afghanistan. Are the people in Afghanistan trying to help Osama bin Laden, or are they hiding him, right, Mackenzie?
Well, I think most of the people right now in Afghanistan are helping the United States look for Osama bin Laden, but the concern is that there are still some people there, because the Taliban had taken over for a very, very long time, and some people there were supporting Osama bin Laden, that they're helping. And that's what's making this hunt even more frustrating.
Yes, sir? Jake?
Well, I just wanted to know, if we bomb Iraq, would that make Iraq and the Taliban allies?
Yeah, to ask your mother.
That's the public affairs officer.
That's a very good question.
That's a very good question, Jake. And I'm not prepared for that. No. If the United States bombs Iraq, will the Taliban or Al-Qaeda be allies? I think there are a lot of people in the world, if the United States bombed Iraq, who would be more angry at the United States. I think people in Al-Qaeda would probably say, isn't that great? Now they're all involved with Iraq, and maybe we can get away with something else, or maybe we can make an ally out of them. Osama bin Laden himself seems to switch sides over the years. Sometimes he was with Iraq, sometimes he was against Iraq. So you don't know for certain what he's doing, but I think right now the organization cares about themselves, and they would be all too happy if the United States went after Iraq, because they'd think there'd be less attention. How is that? Is that okay answer? Okay.
Yeah. Actually, we'd like to subscribe to your dinner conversations. Is anybody else worried about the United States attacking Iraq? Yes, EJ. EJ, right? Front.
I'm kind of worried because Iraq, they have kind of nuclear weapons, and if we took action against them, wouldn't they fight back using these weapons?
It's a good question. The president's one of the parts of the debate now. The president says that Saddam Hussein or Iraq has the makings of nuclear weapons and also bacteriological and chemical weapons. If the United States attacked Iraq, would you feel safer?
If they succeeded, I would feel a little bit safer, but when they were attacking, I wouldn't feel very safe because they could attack Iraq. Because they just, I don't know, they just...
Okay. Well, hey, listen, nobody else has the answer. No reason you should have either. Some of you will remember that Dr. Kyle Pruitt, a psychiatrist, was here with us last year from Yale University.
A year ago, we sat here concerned and worried, not sleeping, frightened for our children, having no clue what it would feel like a year from now. We know there are many children in America who are still quite frightened. They are coping, and they're wonderful. They're asking great questions, but fear is a part of their life in ways that it was not before September 11th. A word to the parents. Think thoughtfully with your children about how they're doing. If they are afraid, they have their reasons. Respect their fears. Talk with them about it. Silence is not protection. It simply precludes solutions. So we have learned over and over again, listen to your children, find out what they mean, because that is going to be the road back to health for them.
How many of you kids, that show of hands is not always the most reliable thing, but how many of you kids actually have talked about it with your parents in the last year? Anybody not talked to their parents about it? Yeah, it's interesting because in a poll we did of the country, we found that about half the kids in the country said they talked to their parents about it, and half of them hadn't. One of the things we noticed last year, and I think I noticed again this year, is that the kids often seem so much more articulate than those of us who are older, which brings me a little bit to Razia. Razia, you're an Arab American and Afghan American, yeah. And Yasmin is an Arab American. And are you both Muslims? And what's the year been like for you?
Well, before September 11th, I never wore my scarf. I just wore it in school because I go to an Islamic school. And outside of school, I never wore it. But after September 11th, I felt that I had to wear it to represent my people, my religion, and myself. And after I wore it, I wanted to show people that I wasn't an evil person, that what people think. But, when I wear it, my parents weren't okay with it. They're like, you're going to get hurt or something. But I felt pride in myself. And when I wore it, I got some remarks from people, saying you're a terrorist or go back to your country. It's changed in some way because when we walk down the street, some people will mock at us and, make comments because they see us wearing a scarf. But I feel that as long as you don't fully understand our religion, then you shouldn't make comments because there's ignorant people and there's extremists in every religion. It's not just Islam. So as long as you haven't read the Quran fully and understood, don't make a comment, whether it be positive or negative.
I have a question. What is America up against this time? Out of all times we've went to war, I don't think we know what we're up against this time.
That's a really tough question, said he, looking around. You know something? That's the kind of question that journalists give to public relations officers in the Army. So what are we up against?
Well, Peter, one of the things that's hard for most people to understand is just because we can't talk about the specifics of something doesn't mean we don't know. And just because it's hard to explain something doesn't mean that we don't understand what it is we're trying to accomplish. What's different about this war is that it's not in any one place, it's not in any one country. There's no defined line that says, I'm on this side and you're on that side. It's global, and it's called a global war on terrorism. We have to be very careful about how we go after each one of those places.
Yeah, Sanita?
Being in a war in Bosnia,
Are you Bosnian?
Yes, I'm Bosnian, and I came here a couple of years ago. And just knowing that when you're in a war, you're terrified to death, because I went through days when I would cry, we would stay in the basement, and you hear airplanes on top, and you would never know, are you going to get out alive? Are you going to be okay, And we all come to America here for freedom and for an education. And you said earlier that if we do bomb Iraq, you said that you would feel better. Why would that make you feel better? Is war the solution to everything?
Natalie?
I just don't think war should be the answer to everything. I think that peace should be the answer.
Now, we're we've run pretty much the end of our time, but before we do, I want to make just sure that a lot of you, anyway, have times for some quick final thoughts about the year. And I want to start with you, Dr. Butts, because you wanted to say something.
I think it's important to hear the children when they speak about peace, negotiation, and talk in order to resolve problems. I think that we would be wise to hear these children as they speak to us in this way. Yes, even about Osama bin Laden, whom we can't find, and about a crazy war that threatens to take more of their lives, because if this war continues, remember, it's these children, not us old folk, who will have to fight.
It is certainly our rule here to listen to the children. Margot.
I think that September 11th really showed us what our nation stands for, and that how strong we really are, and that when the time comes, we really can pull together as one.
Thomas.
I think that the terrorists could have taken away our Twin Towers and the lives of many thousands of people, but they can never take away the pride of being an American.
That's very thoughtful. Annie.
I think that in some ways September 11th might have been good because it showed the worst in people, but it also showed some of the best.
Well, that's very interesting. Okay.
And just that the terrorists were trying to separate us, but it's really brought us more together.
Well, I have a feeling by the number of hands that we could go on, and maybe we should go on by ourselves for quite some time, but that's as much time as they're going to give us today, and I thank you. I thank all of you adults for coming and being so patient with us. But once again, mostly I thank you all for helping us to understand more than we did before we met you. Thank you. We continue our coverage of the first anniversary of the attacks on the country, 9/11. That is Ground Zero in New York, as I think we all now know. This is the Circle of Honor in the middle at the foot of the ramp. And just a short while ago, President Bush, who has been at the Pentagon today and at Shanksville in Pennsylvania, landed here down at the bottom of Wall Street. And he is now going to join many of the families and friends and the dignitaries at Ground Zero to pay his personal respects to the people who died here. You will recall that the president came to New York almost immediately after the disaster on 9/11, and gave a huge boost to the city's spirit, as had, of course, the mayor, Rudolph Giuliani, who has been evident today. Which reminds me that Claire Shipman in Washington has been with us all day, watching the president come and go here and there. Claire, how do you think he's been affected by this day? And I realize that's asking you to be a bit of a mind reader.
Well, I think you can read it on his face to some extent, Peter. It's incredibly serious. He and Mrs. Bush, I think, have both been at times visibly moved, especially greeting the families of the victims in Pennsylvania. Those moments, advisors say, are always very emotional for him. And I think he's a man who has gone through so many changes in this last year. I mean, you see it in his hair. His hair is grayer. And I think you also see it in the way for a while, his moral clarity, which is a natural state for the president, seemed to line up with the world's moral clarity. But I think what will be interesting to watch is the world has moved on to some extent. It's a murkier place again. Decision about going to war in Iraq is a very difficult one, and it will be interesting to see how the president adapts to that change.
It is certainly true that the president sees the world in very clear, distinct terms in this regard. You know, Washington changed so much a year ago. What effect do you think this day might have on official Washington, if any?
Well, I think it will remind everybody in official Washington of a brief moment where there was so much less focus on the truly trivial in terms of partisan politics here. And it went on for a couple of months. And to some extent, partisan politics, Peter, have returned here. But one thing is interesting. The partisan politics that exist now are about more substantive issues. They're about the war in Iraq. They're about budget issues. You don't see the sort of personal animosity that you felt before last September 11th. And I think this year will be another reminder that people like the change.
George Stephanopoulos is also with us, watching from his post in Washington. We're just simply waiting for the president to show up at Ground Zero in a short motorcade from the Wall Street heliport. George, I'm one of those in favor of partisan politics because that's what makes democracy go round. Do you think we'll see more of it in the year ahead?
Well, we started to see a lot over the course of the last year, Peter, coming as we entered actually into 2002. And yes, I think I do. You saw, look at the difference yesterday. The administration went up to Capitol Hill to brief, to give evidence they have about Saddam Hussein's efforts to build weapons of mass destruction, to build nuclear weapons. And the difference between the Republican and Democratic senators coming out of that briefing was very, very stark. The Republicans basically said that they've now seen the evidence they think they need to see. They want to hear the president's speech, but they're basically on the road towards approving the course that the president was going to take. Democratic senators like Richard Durbin of Illinois and others came out and said, I didn't see anything new. I have to be convinced. So yes, I do think you're going to see more partisan disagreement. You also hear from some Democrats, Peter, in the last few days, some skepticism about the timing of this talk about now action against Iraq, suggesting that perhaps it's a little bit too close to Election Day. Why now? Why are we seeing this push now?
George, this is a hugely popular president still, as we've said several times today, and was, when we think back a year ago, I think almost by universal agreement, the absolutely appropriate person to lead the nation at this moment of huge and enormous stress. But I sense a reluctance, certainly in the Democratic Party and in some wings of the Republican Party, to take the president on in foreign policy. Are they just intimidated by his popularity?
I think that's part of it, Peter. I think the second part of that is that they just don't want this debate to be about foreign policy, national security policy. That's traditionally the Republican strength. The Democrats would much more want the election debate to be about corporate irresponsibility and the economic insecurity. But you're right about the president's popularity. He's had the longest sustained high approval ratings of any president since polls have been taken. And that's been a big, big cushion for the president over the last year.
Thanks very much, George. And Claire in Washington. The president now arriving in New York, as I said, when he came that time and got up, you'll recall, with the firemen, grabbed the bullhorn and talked to all of the people. It was like an injection of enthusiasm and energy into people who were deeply and profoundly stressed here. And this city particularly got a lot of it from Rudolph Giuliani. And you can't be in New York without being sensitive to the fact that this has been a more continuingly big part of life than it has been in other parts of the country. You listen to reporting other parts of the country these days, and people are indeed more interested in prescription drugs, taxes, state of the economy. We've tried to cover most of them today, though we haven't done prescription drugs. As the president arrives, I want to introduce two other people here with me in New York. Terry Moran, who's our White House correspondent, and Nikki Stern, whose husband, James Patorti, died in the World Trade Center a year ago today, and Nikki has very kindly given of her time. She's become a very significant spokesperson on behalf of the victims' families. Do you just hate that phrase, victims' families?
I'm not sure what else we can say, but it's getting a little tiring. Survivors.
Survivors. I'm very interested to hear that your diary, or portions of your diary, are in that Smithsonian exhibition. Can you share some of what you wrote in it?
I have the first paragraph memorized because it was a little shocking, because I was not in New York that day. I normally would be on a Tuesday. And I was in a supermarket, and the clerk ran down the aisle yelling, "The World Trade Center's been hit by a plane." And I was holding a carton of eggs and remember thinking to drop the eggs would be too melodramatic. So I walked very slowly to the checkout counter, paid for the eggs, and walked out the door, and then ran to the car and went crazy and went home and turned on the television and tried to count the floors from the bottom to the top, and then saw the second plane hit the second tower.
As I said, you've become very involved in survivors' rights. How do you think, is a government issue as much as anything else, how do you think governments, New York City, New Jersey, New York, the federal government, how do you think they're doing for you all?
I think it's better. I think that there is endemic to governments and private organizations layers of bureaucracy that tend to get in the way of sincere outreach. And for people in trauma, it's very exacerbating to have to deal with paperwork and forms and
multiple death certificates. That's been kind of a challenge for everyone the last
As you know, I was talking to the master of the Victims' Compensation Fund earlier today. Somebody told me you had not been entirely happy with his approach.
Oh, I don't know who told you that. I think that he's become more sensitized to the families.
He agreed.
But I think initially there was some real contention because he had some. It was a delivery style as much as anything. It rubbed some families the wrong way.
Yeah, all of us, you know, who do this as reporters and editors and stuff, do today and covered the last thing, we very often feel like voyeurs. What has today meant to you and the other survivors that you're aware of? Has this been a good day? Has this been an important day?
That's an excellent question. I sometimes think that the voyeurs, or what we call the outsiders, frankly, might think that this is a door through which you walk on September 11th, and that on the 12th, everything is clear. You have closure. And of course, when you have so many people not identified or only slightly identified and not much collected, and you have the mental health issues, some of which the children talked about going forward, and you have people that are still numb, it's an ongoing process. And you have big picture issues that are potentially positive, but that we haven't, as a country, really talked about yet.
And of course, we all have to appreciate and be aware that you can't generalize.
No.
I mean, many survivors didn't attend the ceremonies today, and a lot of people said the last thing in the world they want to do is watch television. They'd go to the woods instead.
Yeah.
It's just too hard for some survivors to be in public, I assume.
Absolutely. I'm bringing 17 widows and mothers to Ground Zero next week from New Jersey because they just couldn't come today, but they need to go. But they couldn't come with all of the ceremony, and they couldn't mark this day that way.
Do you know anybody who hasn't been to Ground Zero?
Yes.
Really, never?
Yes,
really?
yes. Probably half of the people that I'm bringing next week.
Have not been at all. I don't mean just on the anniversary, but not been at all.
At all.
Because other families felt it was so important to be there because they regarded this as hallowed ground. It was like going to a cemetery.
The people you hear from are the people who are able to voice their opinions and get up and go out. And there are a huge number of people that don't fall into that category.
You were one of the people who was reading some of the names today. It took about, as I recall, about 45 minutes to an hour longer than we'd anticipated.
Well, not longer than I anticipated, but yeah, it was long. It was a long day.
And of the names you read, did you know?
Yes, I knew two of the people. And I actually emailed their, in one case, a wife, and then a widow, and the other case, parents, and said, I'm reading their names.
It's fair, I think, to describe you, as we wait for the president to come here to Ground Zero, it's fair, I think, to describe you as an activist. I mean that in the best sense.
Advocate.
Activist. People are getting through this in so many different ways. Some, I assume, in absolute privacy.
Yeah.
Others of you by being very active.
Well, for me, I had no children, and Jim really was, for better, for worse, my whole life.
You were married for 13 years, right?
11, but I knew him for 13, and I had to do something. I felt very isolated. I live in Princeton, New Jersey, although I work in New York, and I found I was able to get information, and then I found there were people that needed it, and then I found there was a reason for me to get up in the morning, which was to get the information to the people that needed it, and I guess that's how I became an activist. And I worked for architects, and so there was something I could do in terms of contributing to the future of Ground Zero.
Are you generally pleased, if not with the, because we haven't never got close to final designs for memorials or rebuilding the trace, but do you think the public generally, the government, the public, everybody's involved, is doing it in a kind and responsible way?
I think they've been very considerate of the families. I'm aware, as an advocate, if you will, that there are other stakeholders involved, and I have early on been interested in hearing their opinion. It's difficult for the families, and I see myself as a translator, and we need to hear from other people.
It's sometimes said that the families have inordinate power I don't mean too much, but I mean unusual power in almost every instance.
Well, I think it's also important to realize, at least when you're talking about ground zero of that, is that the families themselves have differences. And there are many of us that realize and that feel a responsibility to come to a consensus with the other stakeholders. I know that that my husband was a great lover of life and was very aware of the residents and the small businesses and other things going on down there that need to be accommodated.
As I said, we're waiting for the president. Can I just ask you one last question?
Sure.
Chair Moran and I are just sitting here fascinated. People like us ask you all the time, tell your story, tell your story, tell your story. Do you mind?
No. I fell in love with Jim, and he with me. And I saw him at a party, and it was love at first sight. But I had to borrow an apartment in Paris to get him to fall in love with me, because he was kind of a reluctant bridegroom. So I was a cabaret singer in my other life, and I had a friend who was a cabaret owner who owned an apartment in Montmartre, of all the romantic places to go. And I borrowed it, and I invited Jim. I got a rent rebate that summer, and off we went to Paris. I mean, it was just a love story.
Well, we're very grateful to you for giving us the time.
Thank you.
Sharing some of yourself. It's not easy.
No.
Not easy to listen to you either.
Sorry.
We're expecting President Bush momentarily to do something official. We know he is here. Terry Moran, I apologize for ignoring you, but we want to tell our stations along the line that we know that some of you on the East Coast may leave us for local news. We will continue. Thank you for joining us up until now. I'm Peter Jennings.
Good afternoon. A breaking story to pass along to you, a stabbing at a high school bus in Knox County. We want you to stand by right now and let you know that we will be getting back to the president in a moment. The Knox County Sheriff's Department has just confirmed that a teenage girl stabbed another girl in the neck on a Carnes High School bus. The bus number is 146. At this point, there is no word on how bad the injury is, but the Sheriff's Department does have a suspect in custody. The 911 dispatch center says the bus driver called in the stabbing, and we have a crew on the way, and we will bring you the very latest information as soon as we get it.
Again today, we are a nation that mourns.
In New York, in Washington, in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, people pause to remember.
Brian G. Ahern.
And across East Tennessee, a tribute to lost brothers and sisters. And a look ahead to a September 11th story yet to be told.
She can reflect back on this day that she was born and be a blessing to somebody in the future.
This is a 6 News special presentation. September 11th, East Tennessee remembers.
Thank you for joining us. I'm Gene Patterson.
And I'm Lori Tucker. Glad you could be with us today. We have a lot for you over the next hour and a half. Heather Donald has spent the day with local firefighters. We'll join her in a moment in our special 90-minute tribute as East Tennessee remembers September 11th. Now, as we understand right now, President Bush is getting ready to speak to a lot of people at Ground Zero, mainly families of the victims of September 11th, 2001. And this has been a very busy day for him, Gene. He's been at the Pentagon, he's been in Pennsylvania, and now on to New York. He has been making visits today to the scenes of all of the attacks of a year ago. There you see President Bush along with First Lady Laura Bush.
And again, as you can see, the gathered folks there, many of the relatives of victims of 9/11, waiting anxiously to hear the president and what he has to say on this one-year anniversary.
That, of course, has been the scene of a lot of activity today. Extraordinarily rich in emotion, beginning this morning as the victims' names were read by so many different people, beginning with Mayor Giuliani. He was one of the first, and one of the most recognizable and beloved faces who many people believe carried them through such a sad, sad time. And the sadness goes on as you look at the faces of the families.
Yeah, more than 2,000 victims died a year ago at the World Trade Centers, and as Lori mentioned, the names read one by one throughout a very touching and emotional ceremony this morning. Here you see the president now being greeted by military escort, and they will lay the wreath there at the site, now known as Ground Zero.
Some of the things he had to say earlier today at the Pentagon, he vowed to pursue the fight against terrorism. And in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, he joined family members in mourning the deaths of the 40 people aboard United Flight 93. Many of those people hailed as heroes for keeping that plane from going on to its destination, which could have been the Capitol, could have been the White House.
Let's sit back now and watch and witness as the President and First Lady lay the wreath.
They're right in front of the Circle of Honor, which has been the scene of a lot of activity this morning, as many of the families brought flowers as their family member's name was called. Now it is filled with flowers and flags in the middle. And now you see the President greeting many of those family members and survivors.
The President will be speaking here in just a few moments, and we are obviously awaiting his speech. We suspect that it will be as emotion-filled as his other visits to the other locations earlier today. And again, as you can see there, he's greeting many of those who were left behind as the folks on 9/11 died. These are the relatives for the most part.
You saw the woman he just hugged, the woman wearing white, holding the picture. That is so indicative of many of the families that we've seen today. You know, one of the most touching and moving things about September 11th and its aftermath was all the people who brought pictures of their loved ones as they were searching for them through the streets of New York, and now they brought them out again.
This has to be a very, very difficult date in some degrees for the President. I mean, he's had to deal with a lot of raw emotion. I think even a year later, many of the victims, you can see it in the faces there and in the eyes of, and there you see some of the children who lost a parent a year ago today. And it has to be very emotional and difficult for the President, but he's been very, he stood up very tall today, I think you could say, without any kind of bias there, and I think.
All right, as we await the President and his efforts to greet all of these people, and that's very important that he do so today, and he will be speaking momentarily, we're going to take you to another aspect of Ground Zero, captured by reporter John Berman.
At Ground Zero this morning, the sounds of sadness. Exactly 1 year to the minute that the first tower was hit, the city and the country paused for a moment of silence. New York's former mayor, Rudy Giuliani, who once said the losses would be more than we could bear, began reading the names of those killed.
Gordon M. Ama Jr.
2,801 dead. So many names that the reading took more than 2.5 hours. But these were more than just names.
They were our neighbors, our husbands, our children, our sisters, our brothers, and our wives. They were our countrymen and our friends. They were us.
The families of those killed descended to the floor of the dusty site, leaving flowers and mementos in a circle of honor. Heavy gusts of wind left the mourners fighting the elements while they fought back tears. The most poignant moments came from two girls. Mary Ann Keene lost her stepfather.
You were the best father I could ever ask for. I miss you, and I hope you didn't hurt too much.
11-year-old Brittany Clark said this poem makes her think her father is speaking to her.
Do not think of me as gone. I am with you still, in each new dawn.
At sunset, an eternal flame will be lit at a park nearby. The flame will sit next to a sculpture that somehow survived the devastation of 1 year ago. Survived just like this city. John Berman, ABC News, New York.
And as we continue to wait for the President to speak at Ground Zero this evening, it was an emotional day, as we mentioned earlier, at the Pentagon as well.
During a ceremony there this morning, the president addressed 14,000 invited guests to honor those that died there on this day last year. The ceremony was filled with patriotic songs, highlighted by a moment of silence at an Air Force flyover.
A number of services here locally, several honoring firefighters in East Tennessee. 6 News anchor Heather Donald spent the day with local firefighters, and she now joins us live from Station 3 in North Knoxville.
Hi, Gene. Most Knoxville firefighters really spent their day the same way. They began their day the same way by pulling their trucks out of the station onto the driveway, as they have here at Station 3, to show everybody their engines. This is one of many rituals to honor their fallen brothers.
It was a day full of fire engines, flying flags, and chiming fire bells. During a quiet, somber ceremony,
Joseph Angelini Jr., Joseph Angelini Sr.
The Knoxville Fire Department recognized all 343 brothers lost by name.
I'm glad that we're here to remember the ones who are fallen, but it was such a terrible ordeal and a terrible remembrance to have.
Not to mention an excruciating reminder of what can happen every time these public servants take a call. As the flag was lowered to half staff at the Knoxville Fire Department's headquarters, these tough guys turned tender for a moment.
I can only imagine what the firefighters and all the other rescue workers were doing when they were entering the towers in New York. Having to deal with some of that here, I just couldn't imagine all that, what was going through these guys' head, and we knew, they had a job to do.
Rural Metro firefighters took a different route in marking the anniversary, with a procession of emergency vehicles traveling from West Knox County down Cumberland Avenue to the city-county building.
Today is not particularly a fun day by any means, but I think if you take a look at the good that's come out of a year ago and try to focus on that, I know for me personally, I tend to do better.
And they say their lives have gotten better since 9/11. Firefighters are appreciated, their work respected. And whether it be through quiet reflection or a dazzling display, they say they owe that to the 343 fallen brothers they honored today.
Now, Knoxville Mayor Victor Ashe spoke at 2 of the memorial services we attended today. Perhaps one of his most poignant remarks was when he spoke about the 343 firemen that were lost last 9/11. He says that's about the same number of firefighters that make up the entire Knoxville Fire Department. Reporting live from North Knoxville, Heather Donald.
That puts it in perspective. Thank you, Heather. September is normally time for the United Way to pump up its volunteers and go out and fundraise. But to commemorate the September 11th attacks, the kickoff took a very different tone this morning. The United Way launched its Capital campaign along with a Day of Caring. Volunteers got off to an early start, listening to motivational speeches and then heading off to work. Another Day of Caring event, sorting food for the Second Harvest Food Bank. Volunteers came out to go through the food and rescue what was salvageable to go to the needy. Volunteers also helped clean the warehouse, wash vehicles, and stuff envelopes. And Big Brothers Big Sisters showed its hand in the Day of Caring as well. Volunteers came out to paint a mural in the agency's conference room. They did that by projecting artwork done by area children onto the walls for tracing and painting. Several other Day of Caring events going on in East Tennessee as well today. Just to mention a few, volunteers came out to help Goodwill Industries with a community litter project around their facility on Broadway. Volunteers helped doctors and nurses conduct kidney disease screenings for the National Kidney Foundation at several offices, and several extra volunteers came out to help Mobile Meals, an organization that brings warm meals to the elderly in need.
A local family hit especially hard by the terror attacks is bringing its message of hope and love to other East Tennesseans. Rob Lenore was working on the 104th floor of the World Trade Center the morning of the attacks. His parents live here in Knoxville and have spent the day at a series of memorials and ceremonies around the area. His father says they relied on faith to make it through this difficult year.
God sends help when you ask. And it's a power that I can't describe, but it's there, and it keeps us grounded and rooted, and we're able to go forward.
6 News talks one-on-one with the Lenore family. 6 News reporter Don Dare is finishing that story right now, and we'll have that for you at 5:30.
Well, several 9/11 memorials are going up around East Tennessee on this anniversary. 6 News reporter Maggie Pateau is live now from Fountain City Lake for the dedication of a tree that will honor the lives of police officers and firefighters lost last September 11th.
Gene, a very simple and dignified ceremony is underway behind us to dedicate a freedom tree here at the Fountain City Lake. Now, the tree itself is a poplar tree, and in front of that tree is a marker that says their valor and sacrifices will always be remembered and forever appreciated. 9/11/02. And that, of course, is to not only honor those victims that lost their lives in last year's September 11 attacks, but also for the city of Knoxville's firefighters and police officers. In Fountain City, Maggie Pateau, 6 News.
Well, still ahead, flying on a tragic anniversary. We'll have live coverage coming up. Plus, an organization that specializes in responding to tragedies. The Red Cross chooses a special day to dedicate its new facility.
We have an update now on the breaking news story we brought you at the top of this program, a stabbing on a school bus. John Vanderford is live at the scene, which is Woodsmith Road in northwest Knoxville. John, what can you tell us?
Well, I'll tell you what, you're right. We're here at Woodsmith and Ellesmere in northwest Knoxville. The bus is right behind me. It's bus number 146 from Carnes High School. And authorities say a fight happened on this bus a while ago, and one girl was knifed in the neck. She was taken to Children's Hospital, non-emergency, so we can hopefully assume that perhaps her injuries aren't all that bad, but we do not know that right now. But again, there was one girl that was knifed in the neck on that bus. The girl that they believe might have been involved in this has been taken into custody at this point. So at this point, that is all that we know. Again, there was a big fight on this school bus right back here. It was bus number 146 from Carnes High School. And again, right now, authorities are looking into the matter and trying to get to the bottom of what happened. We will have more for you on the story as we get more information. Back to you.
All right, John, thank you very much. Well, a year ago today, terrorists used airliners as bombs, giving many people a whole new meaning to fear flying. The FBI says the American Airlines flight headed to Nashville was the target of an attempted hijacking. That plane has landed safely in Houston, the suspect being questioned. Some scary moments for passengers on a plane that was headed from Memphis to Las Vegas this morning. Air traffic controllers diverted the plane to Arkansas after 3 passengers locked themselves in the plane's bathroom. Tonight, no one's really sure why. 6 News reporter Jennifer Carmack now live from McGee-Tyson Airport with how passengers there are feeling about flying today.
Well, Gene, McGee-Tyson Airport was probably one of the first places here in East Tennessee affected by last year's attacks. I can tell you there's a great deal of emotion swirling around inside of the airport, but with that is a rising feeling of pride and one of patriotism.
So it's been a day of exchanging stories and sharing of emotions at the airport.
But it has been a day of travel for many East Tennesseans. Lisa LeMaster flew in from Dallas this afternoon.
It wouldn't have been my choice of days to fly, but it turned out fine. You know, it's probably safer today than a whole lot of days.
Becky Huckabee with the airport couldn't comment on today's security, only to say federal screeners are now in place, an addition only added yesterday. But nothing seems to be noticeable to passengers.
The security I didn't notice as being any greater than what it has been for the past year.
And though you could feel a definite solemnness in the air here, those who chose to fly today say they did it to show this country is still a strong one.
Yeah, and the captain spoke to us about that, and I feel stronger for it. I'm glad to be here.
Now, the airport observed a moment of silence at 8:46 this morning. A psychologist has been on hand throughout the day for anyone, employees or passengers, having a tough time. Now, employees also wrote letters describing their feelings about 9/11, which they shared in a book. Reporting live from McGee-Tyson Airport, Jennifer Carmack, 6 News.
As you've been watching the coverage from New York today, you've noticed it's been very windy up there. All of that is thanks to the Hurricane Gustav that's lifting off into the Atlantic Ocean. We just have mostly sunny skies returning. 6 Storm Tracker did have a couple isolated showers earlier this afternoon, and now we have dried out. So here's what we see as far as temperatures are concerned on our Instant Weather Net reports at this hour. Things are very comfortable around East Tennessee. Look at the 74-degree reading at over Gatlinburg. That's a sign of some very cool air that's moved into the area, and everybody gets on the cool air bandwagon tonight. 84 at Roane State Community College, Museum of Appalachia at 81 at this hour. So we are looking at forecast lows. Here's the good news. Low 50s along the plateau, mid 50s in the valley. Everybody enjoys cool air not only tonight but tomorrow night as well. 6 predictors showing tonight's and tomorrow's weather this evening. We should be mostly clear as we go into the early morning hours, comfortable in the 50s with a mostly sunny sky. Tomorrow we notice a little bit of moisture increasing, so we'll go partly cloudy by late tomorrow into tomorrow night. Not expecting any precipitation by 11 o'clock, but a few more clouds will move into the region. You should be mostly clear tonight as well. A taste of fall, mid-50s. Tomorrow, how about that? Low to mid-80s, beautiful light winds, and yes, the comfortable air remains into the beginning of the weekend. Right now, cold fronts projected in here Saturday night or Sunday. That brings our next chance for scattered showers and thunderstorms. We do not see any 90s in the forecast, and overnight lows in the 50s and in the low 60s all the way into the upcoming weekend. We'll have more 911 Remembers here in East Tennessee right after this.
You're looking at a live picture from Ground Zero in New York City, where we are still waiting for the president's address from that location. We will get to him when he does begin his speech. On a day so many people lost their lives, a couple in Knoxville was welcoming a baby.
A little girl born moments after the first plane crashed into the World Trade Center.
Happy birthday to you.
Today, Audrey Renee Roberts is a year old. Too young by far to know the historical significance of her special day, a day of unrelenting sorrow for so many.
The second that she came out, a nurse came in and said, a plane just crashed into the World Trade Center.
Roland and Renee Roberts look at their daughter as a precious gift. Friends see her birth date as a sign that good can arrive in the midst of evil.
Because of all of the tragedy and hurt and everything that went on that day, this precious life that the Lord gave was just a symbol of hope.
It was decided that this year, just this year, Audrey would celebrate her birthday a few days early.
On this first year, we wanted to respect those families who had lost loved ones, so we did not want to celebrate on the actual day.
Next year, they will celebrate Audrey's second birthday on 9/11. In the years to come, Audrey will look at her baby book and read words her mother wrote to her about the day she came into the world.
You were born in between the 2 crashes. The Twin Towers collapsed, killing nearly 3,000 people. We watched the news all of the time in the hospital. We just hope throughout her whole life, in the days to come, as people find out about her and on the day she was born and the special circumstances surrounding it, that she can just be a blessing to people. That's what we want.
Wonderful family.
Oh, terrific story.
Really enjoyed meeting them. Thank you. Well, we are still monitoring President Bush's visit to Ground Zero. He has not yet begun to speak.
But we'll be back right after these messages.
Again today, we take into our hearts and minds those who perished on this site 1 year ago.
Some of them with ties to East Tennessee.
I think you stay on your knees in prayer a lot.
So today, East Tennessee and the nation take time to reflect on lives lost and changed forever.
This is a 6 News special presentation. September 11th, East Tennessee remembers.
And welcome back to our continuing coverage marking the anniversary of September 11th. I'm Gene Patterson.
And I'm Lori Tucker. We're glad you're with us. We'll have many reports for you during our special coverage. We'll take you to a poignant memorial service on UT's campus, where people honored attack victims with a moment of silence at the exact time the first plane hit the World Trade Center 1 year ago today. After the attacks, many people wanted to serve their country by joining the military. We'll tell you if that's still the case. And last September's attacks brought an outpouring of donations to agencies like the Red Cross, more than $1 million from Knoxville. We'll tell you where the money went.
But first, we take a look at some of the observances around the country. Today, President Bush and First Lady Laura Bush marked the first anniversary of the attacks by placing a wreath at the Pennsylvania crash site of Flight 93. While there, they met with families of victims. Many people believe passengers on board that plane stopped hijackers from crashing it into its ultimate destination, the White House. The president also visited the Pentagon, and there, in a speech in front of the section of the building that was damaged on September 11th, he praised the military for its actions after the attack and in the war on terrorism. And now you're looking at a live picture from Ground Zero, where the president and First Lady have been for a while now. They laid a wreath a bit earlier. They are talking again with some of the relatives of those victims who were lost a year ago. He will be speaking in just a few moments, and when he does, we will bring you that address live. Coming up later tonight, he will also be delivering a televised address from Ellis Island.
Knoxville firefighters honored their fallen comrades and others who died in the attacks during a special ceremony today. 6 News anchor Heather Donald joins us with more on this emotional tribute. Heather.
Lori, you can see the flag at fire station number 3 is now at full staff. Earlier in the day, that flag, along with every other flag at every other Knoxville Fire Department, was at half staff to honor those that died on 9/11, and that was just the beginning. Fire trucks were pulled from their stations. Firefighters rang their station bells in honor of the 343 firefighters lost last September 11th. Public Information Officer Charlie Barker read all 343 of those names at KFD headquarters this morning. Firefighters say they were anticipating this day for weeks. Some were actually dreading it. Despite the painful memories, though, they say in many ways their lives have changed for the better since 9/11.
Have you felt a little bit more appreciated since 9/11?
Oh, very much appreciated. A lot of times, you know, people don't appreciate you until they need you. But with the 9/11 incident, people have been more than appreciated. People, they come by, they blow their horns, they wave at us, they bring us food.
And that certainly means a lot to them. Rural Metro firefighters marked the day parading in a procession of emergency vehicles through town. And at noon, firefighters and police officers came together at the City-County building for a special ceremony. Now, at that ceremony, I spoke with a lieutenant with Rural Metro Fire Department. He says the response from people being interested in becoming a firefighter has been absolutely amazing. In fact, the number of applicants for their recruit academy has doubled since 9/11, and they've had to add another recruit academy class just to handle all those people. Reporting live from North Knoxville, Heather Donald, 6 News.
Well, shortly after September 11th, students at Oak Ridge High School set out to remember the victims of the tragedy. 6 News reporter Greg Privet shows you the end result of the students' hard work.
Take a look for yourself at the huge crowd here in Oak Ridge. Hundreds of people turning out for the dedication of a permanent memorial to the victims of 9/11. At Oak Ridge High School, it's something everyone took pains to see. When the memorial was uncovered, Melanie Carter was watching.
It's been an extremely emotional day for me, and I can only thank God that we were all blessed with safety during this time.
Family members of 9/11 victims were there for the dedication, along with police officers and firefighters from Oak Ridge. The memorial here in front of the high school is intended to bring home the tragedy of September 11th, especially for students.
But this definitely brings it a lot closer. I have not seen any of the steel or anything. It shows the power, the raw power that happened there and the tragedy. It brings it here.
Melanie Carter's daughter's not even 2 years old, but when Valerie gets a little older, she'll be able to visit the memorial and understand why September 11th has become an unforgettable date in American history.
I think because I have children of my own that having something to symbolize the tragedy so close to home makes it real. It makes it alive.
From this steel beam from the World Trade Center, there will be 50 more memorials sent all across the country. Welding students from Oak Ridge High School will cut steel into pieces and attach it to bronze plaques, and they'll send those memorials to each of the state's capitals. Reporting in Oak Ridge, Greg Privet, 6 News.
Students at Norwood Elementary in North Knoxville invited firefighters, police officers, and members of the military to a very special program in their honor as part of a September 11th remembrance. Students also made each audience member a special token of appreciation to take home with them.
Well, we're going to temporarily break from our special coverage to tell you about breaking news. As we mentioned earlier, a student on a Knox County school bus was stabbed in the neck just a short time ago. It happened after school. 6 News reporter John Vandervoort is live once again in Northwest Knoxville.
Well, right now, the scene is beginning to clear up a little bit. As you can see behind me, the bus is no longer here. It was bus 146 from Carnes High School, and they have taken that bus away now, and authorities are now looking over the scene, trying to figure out exactly what happened. They say that it's a very confusing story at the moment, but what they do know is that one girl was knifed in the neck, and they do think that they have a suspect in custody right now. Again, they are asking a lot of questions, trying to get a lot of information from people in the community, but as of right now, it was bus 146 from Carnes High School, and they say that one girl was stabbed in the neck during an altercation on that bus. Of course, we'll have more information for you as it does become available to us. Now back to you in the studio.
John, a quick question. I know there were several other kids on that bus. How did they get home?
Apparently, a lot of the students that were on the bus actually walked home. It was a bus stop right here in the neighborhood, and many of them just got off the bus and walked home, although there were a number of parents who came and got their kids and escorted them home. We saw one student that was very, very upset about what happened on the bus.
Understandably so. All right, John Vandervoort, we'll check back in with you as soon as you get more information. Well, for families who lost loved ones in the terrorist attacks, this, of course, has been such a difficult year. Tonight, 6 News reporter Don Dare talks with the father of a man who died in the World Trade Center.
Rob Lenore lived 38 years. He visited Knoxville frequently, never lived here, but his parents do. His memory is honored here at Belmorris Elementary, where his mother works. We spoke with his father.
He played for Duke. He was a defensive tackle.
This old picture of Rob Lenore in his Duke uniform hangs in his father's office. John Lenore laughs when he thinks of how his neighbor, former UT football player Jimmy Colquitt, first met his son on the football field in 1982.
We think it's funny today, but they weren't laughing that night.
In that game 20 years ago this month, a Duke player running from his end zone down the sideline gets help from number 74, Rob Lenore, who throws a key block on Jimmy Colquitt, allowing the Duke player to score.
The returner cut off of Rob's block.
For the touchdown!
Scored a touchdown. We kicked the extra point. 25-24. Duke wins.
It's these memories of his son, the support from friends, like his neighbor Jimmy Colquitt, that have allowed John Lenore to work through the pain of losing Rob, who was at work in the South Tower on the morning of September the 11th.
I think you stay on your knees in prayer a lot, okay? Tremendous strength there. And God sends help when you ask.
John says he knows revenge won't get his son back. It's acts of kindness that have helped him, like this observance today. Christy Reynolds of Belmorris Elementary taking her second grade class to see the tree and memorial in Rob's name. These moments, John hopes, will be enduring memories of September the 11th.
Commit ourselves to acts of good works and charity and kindness as much as possible.
Rob Lenore's wife and 2 children live in the New York City area. He is remembered and loved by many people. Don Dare, 6 News.
Beefed up security and heightened awareness on planes flying in the USA today. An American Airlines jet headed for Dallas from Houston was escorted back to Houston after passengers say they saw a man on board with a knife. An airline spokesperson says the plane returned because there was a potential security incident. 2 air marshals were on board the plane. Well, no doubt last year's attacks are on the minds of travelers, especially at McGee Tyson Airport here in East Tennessee. 6 News reporter Jennifer Carmack joins us with the latest. Jennifer.
Well, Gene, like you said, many people were fearful when boarding planes today. Now, fortunately, we had no incidents here at McGee Tyson. Not so much the case in other airports in Tennessee. We want to tell you about a problem on a jet leaving Memphis. It was a Northwest jet heading to Las Vegas this morning. Now, a Aboard that jet were 3 men that drew suspicion from crew members because they were apparently shaving. Now, that plane was diverted to Arkansas, where it was landed. Those men were taken off the plane and into police custody, and the jet then continued on to its Las Vegas destination without any problems. Now, we want to emphasize that that incident had no effect whatsoever on any flights coming in or out of McGee-Tyson Airport. In fact, today has gone pretty smoothly. I want to show you what it looks like inside of the airport. Hallways are very quiet today, and the mood is very somber. The most noticeable change is in the number of passengers that chose to fly. Now, normally around 3,000 to 4,000 people pass through McGee-Tyson. Today, around 2,000 boarded jets out of Knoxville.
So there was definitely a dramatic number decrease, but we anticipated that.
Now, only 2 flights were canceled this morning because of low passenger numbers. Now, the morning travel was lighter than the afternoon travel. A psychologist has been on hand here all day for any passenger or employee having a difficult time dealing with the events. Reporting live from McGee-Tyson Airport, Jennifer Carmack, 6 News.
Well, as we mentioned earlier today, President Bush attended a number of ceremonies marking the anniversary of the attacks. Take a look now at a live picture of the president at Ground Zero. He'll be speaking there in just a short amount of time, and of course we will bring you coverage of that speech when he does.
And still ahead in our special coverage, East Tennesseans remember the victims of the September attacks during a moment of silence. And workers honor those no longer with us by helping others in the United Way's Day of Caring campaign.
It really made me more proud to say I'm American, more patriotic. Overall, it's made me a stronger person, a stronger believer in everything I have beliefs in.
You know, September is normally when the United Way pumps up volunteers to get out and raise money. Today's campaign kickoff had a very different tone. The effort was coupled with the Day of Caring, a program that encourages people to perform acts of caring in the first anniversary of the attacks. Volunteers listened to motivational speeches and then headed off to work.
We have so many people that we have run out of T-shirts, we've run out of projects. The response was overwhelming.
The United Way hopes to raise $10.8 million this year. Early donations top $3.7 million. And volunteers were out in force today working on over 50 Day of Caring projects in our area. Merit Construction helped build a new storage shed for the Florence Crittenden Agency. Some other Day of Caring projects today. Boy Scouts from the Great Smoky Mountain Council helped with trail renovations at Camp Pellissippi. The Children's Museum of Oak Ridge planted a commemorative tree. And workers at Clinch River Home Health helped people repair their homes.
Well, as you know, during last year's attack, the first jet struck the Twin Towers at precisely 8:46 in the morning. 6 News anchor Bo Williams shows us how many East Tennesseans took time today to remember that moment 1 year later.
A moment for reflection here on the campus of UT on the Ayers Hall front lawn. Many gathered today for a moment of silence, a moment that coincided with when the first plane crashed into the World Trade Center 1 year ago.
I was remembering the victims, those who had no idea that they would face the great troubles that they faced.
During the moment of silence, I personally said a prayer that we didn't come here just as students and faculty of UT, but we came here collectively as a whole, as America.
I was feeling a little somber, a little sad throughout the event. But just sit around and just stand and look at everyone here and see how strong everyone else is and how proud people are. It makes me truly happy that I can say I'm an American.
Today's memorial lasted all told about 15 minutes. It consisted of a moment of silence followed by singing, then the ringing of the chimes in Ayers Hall. On the UT campus, Bo Williams, 6 News.
And memorials all across the country today, including, of course, Ground Zero. You're looking at a live picture of the area. Earlier today, former New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani spoke during a ceremony there. Ahead in our newscast, we'll take you to one East Tennessee college where students are showing their appreciation with a letter-writing campaign.
It has caused me to reflect, and I hope I continue to reflect on the sacrifices that people have made to get us this far as a free nation.
Students at South College remembered the attacks today by writing letters to thank U.S. servicemen and women overseas. The students say they want to let military members know how much they are appreciated for protecting our freedom. And their goal is to send 500 letters.
Well, in the days following the attacks on America, everyone, it seemed, needed some way to help. Donations to the American Red Cross skyrocketed. More than $1 billion raised nationally. And here in Knoxville, more than $1 million raised. Tonight, we look at the outpouring of giving and where that money went.
America, standing strong today.
At West Hills Elementary, children still remember gathering pennies to help with relief efforts in New York. Last night, on the eve of the one-year anniversary of the attacks, they gathered again, this time to pay tribute to the victims and to listen to Red Cross volunteer Teddy Richards, who traveled to New York in the days after the attacks. He and many other volunteers were able to offer relief because of the donations of citizens like those in this room.
I think most people wanted to give because of the hurt that they saw people going through, and if you hadn't been through that hurt, then being able to give was the least you could do.
The outpouring of giving was phenomenal. Our telethon, just days after the attack, was one of many examples.
The night that we were doing the WATE telethon, I remember commenting to Bill Evans, well, it would be really nice, you know, if we raised $50,000 to $60,000 over the next couple of days. We raised 10 times that amount.
Local Red Cross officials say of the more than $1 million raised locally, only about $30,000 was spent on administrative costs. The vast majority was rolled into the billion-dollar fund that even today is continuing to help those victimized on September 11th.
And the Red Cross has spent probably two-thirds, right about two-thirds of all of that money so far in helping these families, not only the people who lost a loved one, but the people who lost their house or their home or their employment or their way of living because of the disaster. And we're helping them, you know, not only this year, but we're going to be able to help them with a long-term recovery for the next 3 to 5 years.
At this gathering of the West Hills PTA, the theme was Be a Hero. A year ago, men, women, and children were heroes because of their desire to give.
It was just a way to participate or a way to maybe alleviate the pain in any way that you could for those that were going through the pain and just the shock. I mean, you just felt like you needed to. We saw people, we saw our president jump up and, you know, ready to go, and our military jumped up and they were ready to go. And if you were, a stay-at-home mom with a baby, you think, what can I do? I can gather water for the people, I can send money for water, or I can send bandages, or I can, do something to just try to alleviate that grief and that pain that people were feeling.
And it was a blessing to have great weather today for our memorials around East Tennessee, and we continue to have dry conditions. 6 Storm Tracker keeps it dry north, south, east, and west. If you have plans this evening, here's what we're expecting. Our day planner indicates 83 degrees right now with a mostly sunny sky. A sliver of a moon at 68 midnight hour and 57 early in the morning here. And many areas will be cooler than that early in the morning. We're talking about plateau regions, possibly in the low 50s here. Might even be isolated spots of upper 40s into the mountains, but for the most part, mid 50s here. Here we are for the next 6 days, and notice the absence of 90-degree readings. We'll start the next couple of mornings in the 50s, warm to the mid 80s. There's a cold front due in the area late Saturday, part of Sunday, so that will be an increased chance for showers and scattered thunderstorms, and boy, do we need it. And then a slight chance for a thunder shower coming our way on Monday. So a very, very nice forecast coming our way over the next 6 days, including a chance for a few scattered showers. But the good news here is cool overnight lows and temperatures right where we would expect them for the middle part of September. No 90s over the next 6 days. We'll have more right after this.
Well, for many Americans, last year's attacks created a renewed desire to protect America. Branches of the military reported an increase in interest after the attacks. 1 year later, 6 News reporter Danae D'Arcy investigates whether military recruiting remains high, especially in local programs like ROTC.
This is where the University of Tennessee football team prepares for their games. It's also where Air Force recruits prepare to serve their country. In fact, the tears and the sweat that were shed on this field have been that much more worth it since September 11th.
40 down, 50 down, 6 up, 2, 3, up, 2, 3, up.
It took something that real, as horrible as it was, to just help me. I'm sure a lot of cadets understand what they've gotten into in this program.
Freeze in. Hold.
Recruiting numbers for the Air Force program at UT are up, but Colonel Kaufman says it's not all because of September 11th.
My understanding was after an initial surge, essentially it leveled off and the services really haven't gotten any more than they had projected based on the outcome of September 11th.
The attacks have brought an increased sense of patriotism, which may be why there's a bigger interest now.
Well, this year there's an even higher number of recruits signing up to volunteer for the military. In fact, we talked to one who signed up specifically after September 11th.
Before all this happened, I was pursuing a childhood passion of my own to fly airplanes. And I was doing that civilian world, just taking flying lessons and stuff. And halfway through that, this happened.
Cadets also latching on to the job security the military offers, keeping in mind economic turmoil following the attacks.
When I graduate in May, 30 days afterwards, I'll have a job in the #1 Air Force in the world. And not many people, when they graduate college, are going to have that job.
Even if the terrorist attacks on America have not directly impacted military recruiting numbers, the event continues to motivate the recruits.
There's a sense of responsibility of these are the shoes I'm going to have to fill.
Branches of the military reporting an increase in interest since September 11th, not necessarily an influx of those signing up. This year, retention will be the issue, keeping those recruits in the program. Danae D'Arcy, 6 News.
And of course, we want to let you know we are still monitoring President Bush's visit to Ground Zero. As soon as he begins to speak, as we see there live, there he is still greeting some of the families of the victims. As soon as he begins to speak, we will take you back there.
And we're going to take a break now and return with more of East Tennessee Remembers.
Get ready for
C.C. Lyles.
It is a day of memory and mourning. The sounds of sadness ringing in Pennsylvania.
Jacobs Welch.
The Pentagon. And New York. And reverberating here in East Tennessee.
We're all in this together.
And together, families, firefighters, and police pause in East Tennessee to honor lost brothers and sisters, while others band to rebuild one community at a time.
This is a 6 News special presentation. September 11th, East Tennessee Remembers.
And welcome back to our continuing coverage of our special tribute marking the anniversary of September 11th.
The terrorist attacks affected families here in East Tennessee, really affected all of us. 6 News reporter Don Dare spoke with the sister of a former Knoxville man killed moments after he arrived for work in New York City.
When you got this, what's this mean?
I thought, you know, there's a very busy man.
A condolence letter from George and Laura Bush, sent to Brenda Vandiver last year, states how sorry the First family is about the death of Tony Carnes, Brenda's younger brother who died in the World Trade Center.
But yet he took the time to remember these almost 3,000 people to send a card. You can feel the texture of the fabric.
Here's an American flag sent to Tony's sister. It was aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour last February. Here's a letter of encouragement sent from a total stranger who lives in Washington.
She said that when time permits and on her job at quiet times, that she'll say a little prayer.
It's these messages of care and concern that have touched Brenda Vandiver. Her brother Tony had been an honor student at Gibbs High School, class of 1982. 3 years ago, he moved to New York City, where his sisters would visit. He worked on the 97th floor of the North Tower, the first building hit a year ago today.
There was a Reader's Digest issue December of 2001, and I looked through it, and on page 86, I happened to look down, there was a picture of my brother.
And the poem here is about death.
Right.
Death is nothing at all. I have only slipped away into the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we are still.
Mm-hmm.
It spoke to you, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because there is your brother in that picture speaking to you.
Mm-hmm.
A memorial and the planting of a tree last October at Tony's old high school meant a lot to Brenda and her 2 sisters. It's been a difficult year for them. They were all so close to their little brother.
We're all in this together.
And that helps you pull through.
It does. Yeah, all of this does.
Knowing that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And that's a comforting feeling. Don Dare, 6 News.
And Tony Carnes is remembered tonight by his 3 sisters, Vicki Ratcliffe, Gail Barker, and Brenda Vandiver.
Local firefighters and police officers felt as though they lost hundreds of brothers and sisters when the Trade Center towers fell last September. Today, there were a number of ceremonies honoring those public servants. 6 News anchor Heather Donald is live at Station 3 in North Knoxville, where firefighters have had a very long day.
They have had a very long day, as you say, Gene. It's really been a day of highs and lows for local firefighters and police officers. We are here at station number 3, where the firefighters here just handed me this. This is one of the highs from today. They were handed this book from Mrs. Grubb's 3rd and 4th grade class at Friendsville Elementary. It's really just filled with letters thanking them for all of their hard work that they do throughout the year. This made these firefighters' day. Another thing that made their day were memorials and services in the area, probably the biggest of which was in downtown Knoxville at the City County building. The theme there and really throughout the day, we must remember and honor those that serve our community, specifically our firefighters and police officers. One Knoxville police officer I spoke with says we can never forget 9/11, but it is time to move on.
One of my major concern is to look forward. The 9/11 brought a lot of attention to the public service industry, and it really makes citizens aware of just how difficult our jobs really are.
And the memorials aren't over for the evening. There's still one left tonight at 7 at Market Square. We understand there are going to be a lot of firefighters, police officers there. It is open to the public and it's free. Reporting live from North Knoxville, Heather Donald, 6 News.
Well, services of remembrance for many area churches today. 5 downtown Knoxville churches of different faiths came together for an interfaith service. The service at the First Presbyterian Church included prayer and remembrance. It focused specifically on the victims of the attacks and to restoring peace and security to our nation.
And on this date, the U.S. is operating on a high alert. Yesterday, Homeland Security issued a Code Orange alert, meaning the U.S. is at high risk of a terrorist attack. 6 News anchor and reporter Amy Rutledge investigates what TVA is doing to keep our dams and power plants safe during these times.
TVA is responsible for flood control and power in 7 states. Now, while directors acknowledge that there is no possible way to really plan for something like the September 11th attacks, they say they're confident the power and water will keep flowing in East Tennessee. This is the noise people might hear if some sort of TVA emergency happened. But officials are confident that won't happen today. 50 dams, 29 of them hydro, 3 nuclear plants with 5 reactors, all along 17,000 miles of transmission lines fall under TVA's responsibility. Because it is a federal corporation, TVA's directors say those resources have remained on heightened state of alert since September 11, 2001. Along with the FBI and the Department of Energy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has handed down guidance to keep security tight. Those measures have been added to TVA's own police force and help from local law enforcement.
We have changed the rules for access to our facilities. People are not allowed as free and open access to our facilities that they had had in the past. It's an unfortunate loss that our nation has suffered.
A lot of the security measures that have been put in place can't be seen at the dams that control this water. The TVA building itself is much more secure than it was the day before the attacks. Also, the operations plant in Chattanooga has been on a heightened state of security since the attacks on September 11th. In Knoxville, Amy Rutledge, 6 News.
TVA also added stricter requirements for people entering TVA operations.
We're going to temporarily break away from our special coverage to tell you about a developing story we've been following since 5 o'clock this afternoon. A student on a Knox County school bus was stabbed in the neck. 6 News reporter John Vanderford is live in Northwest Knoxville.
Well, Gene, right now authorities are continuing to piece together exactly what happened. The scene behind me right now at Woodsmith and Ellesmere is cleaned up, but again, they are trying to put together the pieces of this puzzle. Here's what we know right now. The driver of bus 146 from Carnes High School made a stop at Ellesmere and Woodsmith. Apparently, that's when the fight began. A 14-year-old girl was knifed in the neck and taken to Children's Hospital, non-emergency, where we're told that she is in good condition tonight. Police on the scene believe that her injuries are probably not going to be life-threatening in any way, which is good news. They do have a suspect in custody in this incident that happened here at Ellesmere and Woodsmith. As you can imagine, though, a lot of parents very concerned here in the community. Many of the students that were on the bus were actually able to walk home on their own. We will continue to follow the story and have more information for you when it becomes available to us. I'm John Vanderford, 6 News.
Well, still ahead, many people spent 9/11 caring. Coming up, a way to remember the attacks by giving back to the community.
A somber day for people here at McGee-Tyson Airport. I'm Jennifer Carmack. I'll have more coming up in a live report.
It has just taught me to, I don't know, not take everything for granted. I don't just try to live each day to the...
A Northwest Airlines plane from Memphis to Las Vegas had to be diverted today. An emergency management spokesperson says 3 people were acting suspiciously during the flight. They had locked themselves in the plane's bathroom. The plane landed in Fort Smith, Arkansas. No one on the plane was hurt. An investigation is going on now to figure out what happened and why. The nation's airports reflect lighter traffic on this day. Some people skipped flying altogether and drove. 6 News reporter Jennifer Carmack shows us if people stayed away from McGee-Tyson Airport.
Well, it's been a trying day for airport employees and passengers alike here at McGee-Tyson today. Now, the number of travelers were down dramatically from what they usually are, and what's usually a noisy hallway here at the airport was quiet as a somber mood took over. It was obvious that last year's attacks were in everyone's thoughts today.
You could tell that everybody had it, the idea in their back of their minds, but there wasn't anything really out of the ordinary.
Now, 2 flights were canceled because of low passenger numbers. Now, travelers were down from a usual 4,000 to around 2,000, and security had been increased today, but nothing that was obvious to any of the travelers that passed through here. Reporting live from McGee-Tyson Airport, Jennifer Carmack, 6 News.
Well, we are continuing to monitor the president, who is at the World Trade Center site now. You see the pictures there. This is a live photo. We expect that the president will be speaking shortly.
Really made me appreciate America that much more. It really did. Just to watch the people get together like they did.
Vincent Brunton, Ronald Paul Buca.
A moving ceremony at Ground Zero in New York City.
Gregory Joseph Buck.
Family and friends listen as the names of the victims were read. 2,801 people died in the World Trade Center attacks.
The president addressed thousands of people during a ceremony at the Pentagon. President Bush says the people who died in the attacks did not die in vain.
The president and first lady also traveled to Shanksville, Pennsylvania for a service where Flight 93 crashed. Bush laid a wreath, then spoke privately with relatives of the people killed.
And right now, President Bush and First Lady Laura Bush are in New York City at the scene of Ground Zero. They've been there for about an hour and 15 minutes. You see a large crowd gathering. These people, many of these people, families of the victims who have been here all day and have so been looking forward to a comforting visit from their president.
And I think it should be noted that the president has taken the time to spend with many of the victims' relatives, as Lori mentioned, been there about an hour, and again, we're waiting on him to speak. He should be making that address shortly. Right now, though, many East Tennesseans mark the anniversary by getting out and contributing.
Adrian McLean joined volunteers during this National Day of Caring.
Volunteers are giving the Florence Crittenden Agency a new shed. You can see with their bedding and supplies, this one's completely filled, and the addition of new space is a welcome sight.
I think it's very appropriate to actually be building something on a day when so much was torn down.
Who would think a small shed could make such a difference? The Florence Crittenden Agency takes care of at-risk teens, and they've run out of room for the girls' personal belongings.
It helps us in our mission to make the girls as happy as they can be so they can work on their mental health.
This is just one of over 50 projects taking place in East Tennessee today. Many of the volunteers say giving back is a good distraction from the sadness of this day.
We're
all very busy doing our jobs, but today wouldn't have been that kind of day. I think we all would have been kind of stuck back in time a year ago.
What we'll do is set the 4x4s, I think, at the ends first.
People at Marvin House's company, Merit Construction, volunteered to put their talents to work and say this is their contribution to rebuilding America.
Doing something like this on today is a way of showing that we care for the community and helping give back a little that we sometimes forget to do.
The volunteer crews say they will definitely finish their project today, and that includes the doors, the roofing, and the finishing. After that, everyone here at the agency says they'll move in right away. Reporting from West Knoxville, Adrian McLean, 6 News.
The Day of Caring kicked off along with the United Way's Capital Campaign. The organization contributes to more than 52 programs like the Florence Crittenton Agency. It hopes to raise $10.8 million this year. WATE employees spent the Day of Caring helping out the Boys and Girls Clubs of Blount County. About 9 employees volunteered to add on touches of paint to the building. United Way hopes the good deeds of folks won't stop with 9/11.
And in North Knoxville, Fountain City remembered 9/11 with a tree planting ceremony. The Fountain City Lions Club dedicated a Freedom Tree Memorial. It honors Knoxville police and firefighters and remembers the victims of September 11th. The tree is located near the flagpoles at Fountain City Lake. And it was a solemn ceremony honoring East Tennessee heroes at the Knoxville Center Mall today. The mall unveiled a quilt with 90 squares representing heroes in local East Tennesseans' lives. The marketing director came up with the idea back on Memorial Day, thought it was only fitting to unveil the quilt on the 9/11 anniversary. The thought being that it was that day that produced so many heroes in all shapes, colors, and backgrounds.
Well, Union County students chose a special way to remember today's anniversary. It took a little while, but 780 students at Horace Maynard Middle School created a human flag. 8th and 7th graders created the red-white stripes with 6th graders filling in the blue. Great job. The attack on America challenged many educators to help children understand what happened and try to heal. Students at Horace Maynard remembered the attacks through creative writing. Teachers used the attacks to teach life lessons and get valuable messages across to the students.
And respect each other's opinions, and it's okay to disagree. And I think since last year, I've even gone farther trying to express that and the importance of tolerance for each other and love and unity and, you know, being a big family.
In Union County, teachers incorporate current events along with following a core curriculum.
We had a cold front slide through the area this afternoon. Did squeeze out 1 or 2 isolated showers, but right now 6 storm tracker is all dry and temperatures start to drop with sunny skies overhead right now. A little breezy, 80 at the Millers Building, 73 at Ober-Gatlinburg, 81 Dollywood, 82 at Blount Memorial, and 82 at Roane State Community College. The high earlier today was 88. The low this morning, 66. We're at 83 right now. Should be in the upper 60s at midnight with a sliver of a moon, and early in the morning, just after sunrise, temperatures in the mid-50s, and the next couple of mornings we'll have temperatures in the mid-50s. A very, very comfortable forecast as we work toward the weekend. By the way, you saw the very windy conditions at ground zero. That's partially because of the same cold front that's gone through the area, and partially because Hurricane Gustav left the coast of New Jersey and Manhattan and went out to sea this afternoon, but the winds are still a big factor for those folks up in the Northeast. 85 on Friday afternoon, should be in the low to mid-80s Saturday and Sunday. We have another cold front projected in the area late Saturday or Sunday. That increases our chances for a few scattered showers and thunderstorms, so we have the cool air back in place, near normal temperatures. Now if we can get some rain mixed in, I think we're going to be in really, really fine shape. Notice no 90s in the forecast. We deserve that after a very hard start to September, and overnight lows in the 50s and 60s. Looks very, very nice. So if we can get some of those showers and thunderstorms later in the weekend, the near normal temperatures are in place, and I think gradually we'll get back to normal. Already it's been so dry, and if you've noticed just recently, some of the leaves on the trees starting to fade already. Yeah. So fall is not too far away.
About that time. All right, Matt. Well, here's another live look from Ground Zero in New York City as the president continues to greet families of victims of 9/11-2001. We're continuing to monitor his visit, and we will go to the scene as soon as he begins his speech. After the attacks, America responded with the war on terrorism. Well, coming up, a Seymour High School baseball coach, home now from the war.
It's kind of like a scare, never knowing, what's going to happen next, if this is possibly going to happen again.
A Seymour High School baseball coach is just back from Afghanistan. 6 Sports' John Haney has his family story.
Last spring, while she helped with the Seymour baseball team, Christy McCord could only see her husband in these photos. But just last week, the U.S. Army captain came home from Afghanistan.
And all of a sudden you step in, and you see the good old US of A, and, it hits you. All of a sudden, you're home, and, this is what you were fighting for. This is what it was all about.
It's been wonderful having him back. I don't think I realized at the time how much we did miss him until we actually got him back. But I was scared that something was going to happen to him and that Lexi would never get to see her daddy.
Brian received emergency leave to help Christy care for their first child. Baby Lexi arrived prematurely, but she's getting bigger and better every day.
Matter of fact, my wife made the comment and said, well, everybody at school was making bets who I would kiss first, the baby or her. Well, I wound up kissing the baby first. So I guess I could tell you how I felt.
With September 11th now upon us, the McCords share a unique perspective about the anniversary.
Really, I'd almost just, if I could just climb to the top of Mount LeConte and just let the day go away from me, would be better, because it hit me hard. I don't want to forget it, because there's no way. That's something that's going to be in my, till the day I die, just like Pearl Harbor was with my grandfather.
It's a whole different perspective than what it was last year. But perspectives on a lot of things change. And family really is the most important thing.
One more note, and this should make Seymour baseball fans happy. Brian is back to stay, and he'll be back here on the field this spring coaching his other family. In Seymour, John Haney, 6 Sports.
And coming up, a look back on the attacks and how America changed.
World News Tonight will continue coverage of the September 11th anniversary coming up in just a few moments.
But we leave you now with a look back. 6 News editors Mike Wiseman and Chris Opper take us back to the day America changed. Good night.
This is an ABC News special report.
This is at the World Trade Center. Obviously a major fire there, and there has been some sort of explosion. We don't fully know the details. There is one report, as of yet unconfirmed, that a plane has hit of the World Trade Center.
The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war.
It's not just a myth, or it's not just something that was in a movie like Independence Day. It really happened.
So I have family in New York, so yeah, it's definitely frightening. I'm from New York originally.
Obviously, we're up against some incredible evil forces, and we're taking precautions with buildings that have risk associated with them.
We couldn't get focused on anything. It's real strange to hear about this kind of stuff, because we look back in the history books to, and see Pearl Harbor and all that, but, we'd never think that it would actually happen nowadays.
I think we all need to pray for this country and for the other countries around the world that embrace freedom and democracy.
I think it's time that we turn back to God, depend on Him.
I think I would just tell people to pull it together and try not to be afraid. Don't let the terrorists win.